Hazel Carter didn't knock on that door. She shoved it open with both hands, her bag hitting the ground before her boot even crossed the threshold, because after 4 days on a stagecoach, eating nothing but dried biscuit and swallowing other people's cigarette smoke, she was done being polite about her own life. She had $32 left in the world, a letter in her coat pocket, and the absolute bone-certain conviction that this time something was finally going to go right. Then the crying started. From upstairs. From somewhere she hadn't been told existed. And Hazel Carter went very, very still. If this story already has your heart, do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and follow this channel so you don't miss a single word of what happens next. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that doorway, because what Hazel found on the other side of it was about to change everything she thought she knew about starting over. The letter had said orderly. That was the word Hazel Carter had read 7 times on the bench outside the employment office in Santa Fe, her finger tracing the ink until she nearly wore through the paper. Orderly household, respectable position, immediate start. She had folded it carefully, pressed it flat against her chest like a thing that could be broken, and then boarded the first stagecoach heading southeast before anybody could talk her out of it. That was 4 days ago. 4 days of hard sun and harder benches. 4 days of sitting across from a traveling merchant who smelled like turpentine and kept asking her where her husband was, as though a woman couldn't exist without one. 4 days of watching the landscape change from the familiar pale dust of Santa Fe to the deeper, rawer emptiness of the territory's southern reaches where the scrub went on so long it started to feel like a punishment. She'd eaten the last of her biscuits somewhere around the 2nd day, spent the 3rd day telling herself she wasn't hungry. The 4th day, she'd stopped talking to herself altogether and just watched the land roll past and thought about the word orderly like it was a prayer. Hazel was 27 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches in her boots, and she was a large woman, not the kind that society overlooked easily. Not in 1887, New Mexico Territory, not anywhere. She had long since stopped apologizing for the space she occupied. Her mother had spent 30 years apologizing for things that weren't her fault, and it had not saved her from a single one of them. Hazel had decided somewhere around age 16 that she would rather be looked at than invisible, and that she would meet every hard stare with one of her own until it was the other person who looked away first. She had dark brown hair pinned up under a practical hat, hands that were already calloused from years of work she wasn't paid fairly for, and eyes the color of creek water in autumn. Not beautiful in the way that stopped men in the street, but sharp. The kind of eyes that noticed things. The kind that remembered. Her parents had died 8 months apart. First her father to a fever that moved too fast for any doctor to catch. Then her mother to something quieter and harder to name, grief maybe, or just the exhaustion of loving a man for 32 years, and then being asked to go on without him. Hazel had buried them both, sold the house, paid the debts, looked at what was left, which was $32, and a talent for running a household that nobody had ever thought to pay her properly for, and decided that staying in the town where everyone knew her story was the one thing she absolutely could not do. So she'd gone to the employment office. And she'd found the letter. Housekeeper position available. Mercer Ranch, Harlow Creek, New Mexico Territory. Orderly household. 5 days ride southeast of Santa Fe. Respond immediately. Inquire C. Mercer. She had written back the same afternoon. The response came in 3 days, which was fast enough that she probably should have been suspicious. It said, position yours. Come at once. Nothing else. No details. No salary figure. No description of the household or its needs, or what an orderly day looked like in Harlow Creek, New Mexico Territory. She had told herself that was normal. That men in the territory weren't given to long letters. That she would sort out the details when she arrived. She had been wrong about all of it. The stagecoach left her at the edge of a rutted track with a handmade sign that said, Harlow Creek, and a driver who didn't offer to help with her bag. She watched the coach disappear into a rising column of dust, and then stood very still for a moment, the heat pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight, and made herself breathe. The walk to the ranch was nearly a mile. She knew because she counted her steps, which was something she did when she was nervous and didn't want anyone to know it. By the time the buildings came into view, she had reached 4,112, and her boots were coated in a fine pale dust that had worked its way into every crease of the leather. The ranch was not what she'd imagined. She'd allowed herself to imagine something solid. Something that had been built by people who intended to stay a proper house, with a covered porch and maybe a kitchen garden fencing that stood straight, a barn that didn't list to one side like a man who'd had too much whiskey. She had not let herself imagine anything grand, but she had let herself imagine functional. What she was looking at was not functional. The fencing was down in 3 places she could see from where she stood. The barn door hung open at a wrong angle, the upper hinge gone, and the whole thing looked like it was being held up more by habit than by any structural intention. The kitchen garden, if there had ever been one, was nothing but cracked earth and the ghost of something that had once tried to grow there. 2 chickens wandered across the yard with the aimless energy of creatures that had not been managed in some time. The house itself was 2 stories. It had probably been decent once. The bones were solid. She could see that somebody had built it to last, had chosen the timbers carefully, and set the foundation right. But the windows were filmed with dust, and one of the porch boards was rotted clean through, and there was a quality to the whole place that she could only describe as forgotten. Like something that had been loved once, and then through no malice, but simply through the grinding pressure of grief, had been let go. Hazel picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She did not knock, exactly. She lifted her fist and brought it down twice sharply, the way she knocked on things when she wanted to be heard and not ignored. The silence on the other side lasted long enough that she began to wonder if she'd been given the wrong address. Then footsteps. Slow. Not hurrying. The man who opened the door was taller than she'd expected, with the kind of frame that had been built by actual physical work rather than intention. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that might have been handsome once and now was just tired, in a way that had settled into the bones. He had not shaved in what looked like several days. His shirt was clean but wrinkled like it had been washed and then left in a pile somewhere and only retrieved when the situation demanded it. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said nothing. "I'm Hazel Carter," she said. "I wrote about the position." He stared at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, not in a way that felt threatening, but in the way of a man who had forgotten that other people existed and was being reminded of it abruptly. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. His voice was low and rough, like it hadn't been used much lately. She stepped inside. The inside of the house hit her harder than the outside had because the outside had given her time to prepare. Inside, there was no preparation available. The front room was large and had probably once been arranged with some care. She could see the ghost of it in the placement of the furniture, in the good quality of the pieces themselves worn now, but originally chosen well. But over everything, there was a layer of neglect so thorough it had almost become its own kind of decor. Dishes on the table from what looked like 2 different meals, neither of them recent. A coat on the floor near the stairs that nobody had picked up. Dust on every flat surface. And then, upstairs. A sound. A baby crying. Not fussing. Not the mild complaint of a fed and comfortable infant who wanted attention. This was the thinner, more desperate cry of a baby who had been at it for a while, who had perhaps learned that crying longer did not mean anyone came faster, but who kept doing it anyway, because what else was there to do? Hazel went very still. She turned and looked at Cole Mercer, who had closed the door behind her and was standing with his hands at his sides, looking at a point somewhere to the left of her face. "You have a baby," she said. "Yes." The letter, she said carefully, did not mention a baby. "No." She waited. He didn't add anything. "How old?" she asked. 7 months. "And upstairs?" She stopped because she had heard something else now. Feet. More than one set moving across the ceiling above her in the shuffling, uncertain way of children who are trying to be quiet and not quite managing it. "How many children do you have, Mr. Mercer?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that tells you the answer before the words do. "5," he said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Hazel set her bag down on the floor. She did this deliberately because she needed a moment, and setting her bag down, bought her one. She looked at the man standing in front of her, this tired, silent, wrinkled-shirted man who had written her a letter and told her nothing, and she felt something move through her that was not yet anger, but was getting there. "5 children," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." And the letter said, "Orderly household." He had the decency to look at the floor. "How long?" she said, keeping her voice very even. "Has this household been without someone to manage it?" 7 months, he said. "Since—" He stopped, started again. 7 months. The same number as the baby's age. She didn't ask him to explain that. She already understood what it meant. "3 women came before you," he said, still looking at the floor. "All left within the first week." "I can see why," she said. Upstairs, the baby's crying had not stopped. If anything, it had gotten more insistent, taking on a quality of genuine distress that made something in Hazel's chest tighten against her will. "Where are the children now?" she asked. "Upstairs. I told them to stay up there when you arrived." "Did you feed them today?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but she felt it like a door swinging. "Ruth fed them," he said. "The oldest. She's 12, a 12-year-old girl. Feeding 4 younger siblings and a 7-month-old infant, for 7 months. Hazel picked up her bag. Cole Mercer watched her pick it up, and something crossed his face that she could not quite name. Not quite relief draining away, more like a man who had expected to be abandoned so many times that he'd stopped allowing himself to feel surprised by it. He just watched her with those exhausted, empty eyes, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. And that was when she heard the feet on the stairs. Not running. Small, careful steps, the kind a child takes when they're not sure whether they're allowed to be where they're going. Hazel didn't turn around yet. She stood with her hand on the door handle and listened to those steps come down the stairs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then stop. She turned. The girl was maybe 5 years old, small for it maybe, or maybe the territory just made children look small. She had dark hair that needed brushing, and eyes that were too serious for her face. The eyes of a child who had been watching adults carefully for long enough that she'd learned to read them. She was wearing a dress that had been washed so many times, it had faded to a color that had once been blue, and she was standing 3 steps from the bottom of the stairs, holding the banister, with one hand looking at Hazel with an expression that was trying very hard not to be frightened. They looked at each other. The girl, Emma though Hazel, didn't know her name yet, took the last 3 steps down, slowly crossed the room, and stopped directly in front of Hazel. Then she reached up and took Hazel's free hand in both of hers. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Hazel looked down at those small fingers wrapped around her rough ones, and something happened in her chest that she could not have described to anyone who asked. It wasn't sentiment exactly. It wasn't pity. It was something older and more fundamental, the recognition of a thing that needed and the absolute impossibility of walking away from it. She stood there for a long moment. Then she set her bag back down on the floor. "All right," she said to no one in particular, to the room, to herself. "All right, where's the kitchen?" Cole Mercer stared at her like she had said something in a language he'd almost forgotten. "Through there," he said finally. He gestured toward a door at the back of the front room. "I'm going to need to assess what you have before I can do anything useful. After that, somebody is going to bring me that baby, because that child has been crying for 20 minutes and I can hear it in his breathing that he's hungry." She let Emma keep holding her hand as she moved toward the kitchen doorway. "And then, Mr. Mercer, you and I are going to have a conversation about what you actually need, what you actually have, and what this position is actually going to look like. Because I can tell you right now, it is not what that letter said. He didn't answer immediately. She paused at the kitchen door and looked back at him. "Do you understand me?" she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, quietly, like a man who had said those words before but had forgotten what it felt like to mean them. The kitchen was worse than the front room. Hazel stood in the doorway for a moment and took it in, not with despair, but with the practiced eye of someone who had spent her whole life being handed situations that were worse than they'd been described and making them workable through the application of will and organization. She had done this in her mother's house when her father got sick and stopped being able to manage the farm. She had done it for Mrs. Helton in Santa Fe for 3 years before Mrs. Helton decided she couldn't afford a housekeeper anymore. She knew how to look at chaos and find the system underneath it. The problem here was that the system had been gone for 7 months. The chaos had set in the way cold sets into a house that hasn't been heated gradually, at first, then completely. She let go of Emma's hand gently and moved to the shelves. Flour. Not much. Salt. Some dried beans. A small amount of cornmeal. A tin of something that had lost its label. She opened it and smelled it, and it was salt pork still good. She went to the icebox. No ice hadn't been ice in some time from the smell of it, and found the remains of something that had once been milk and should have been thrown out 3 days ago. She found hardtack. She found coffee, which was a mercy. She found a pot that was clean enough to use if she washed it. She found no bread, no vegetables, no fruit, nothing that a growing child could reasonably be expected to thrive on. She stood in the middle of the kitchen with her hands on her hips and thought about the baby upstairs still crying, and about Ruth, who was 12 years old and had been feeding 4 siblings for 7 months. Then she rolled up her sleeves. Emma had followed her into the kitchen and was standing near the door watching with those serious eyes. "Can you go up and get your sister?" Hazel asked her. "The oldest one. Tell her to bring the baby down." Emma nodded and disappeared. Hazel had the pot washed and on the stove, and the fire started before the footsteps came back down the stairs. She heard them coming, more feet this time, a whole small crowd of them, and didn't turn around yet, just kept her attention on the fire she was coaxing into life. "Ma'am." The voice was careful, older than she'd expected from a 12-year-old, or maybe not. Maybe it was just a voice that had been doing adult things for long enough that it had learned to sound that way. Hazel turned. There were 4 of them in the doorway. Ruth was the oldest 12 with her father's coloring, and a bearing that was trying very hard to be responsible and showing in the tightness around her eyes exactly how much it was costing her. She was holding the baby who had stopped crying and was now making small, exhausted sounds, the hiccuping aftermath of a long cry finally acknowledged. Next to Ruth was a boy who was maybe 9 or 10, dark-eyed and watching Hazel with an expression of open suspicion. Behind him, a girl of maybe 7, with her thumb almost but not quite in her mouth, eyeing the strangers the way children eye things they have learned can disappear, and Emma back in the doorway still watching. "I'm Hazel Carter," she said. "What's the baby's name?" "Samuel," Ruth said. "He's 7 months." "I know. Is he eating solid food yet?" "Some. When we have it." "What does he usually have in a day?" Ruth's jaw tightened slightly, not with attitude, with the particular strain of someone being asked to account for something they've been managing alone and are afraid of being judged for. "Whatever I can get him. Mostly I've been mashing cornmeal with a little water. Sometimes there's milk when Papa remembers to check in town." Hazel held out her arms for the baby. Ruth hesitated, that instinctive hesitation of someone who has been the one holding something precious for so long that letting go feels like risk. Hazel waited without pressing, and after a moment Ruth handed Samuel over. He was small, smaller than he should have been maybe. He had thin dark hair and his father's same exhausted eyes, and when Hazel settled him against her shoulder, he made a sound that was not quite a word, but was something like one. She put her hand on his back and felt his ribs through the cloth of his clothing, and kept her face very still. "What's your name?" she asked the boy. "James," he said. Still suspicious. Still watching. "And yours?" she asked the 7-year-old. "Nell," she said, almost inaudible. "All right." Hazel turned back to the stove, still holding Samuel, and adjusted the fire. "James, can you bring me water from the pump? There should be a bucket somewhere." James didn't move immediately. "You gonna stay?" he asked. It was a direct question asked without apology, and she respected it for that. She looked at him over Samuel's head. "I'm going to cook supper," she said. "We'll see about the rest." He considered this. Then he went for the bucket. Cole Mercer appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, drawn perhaps by the sound of actual activity or by the smell of something being prepared that wasn't hardtack. He stopped when he saw her at the stove, Samuel on her hip, Nell handing her the wooden spoon when she asked for it, James pumping a second bucket of water without being asked again. He stood in the doorway and looked at all of it for a moment. "Mr. Mercer," Hazel said without turning around. "You and I need to talk, but not now. After supper and after this baby is settled. Right now I need you to go into town and get milk if there's any to be had, and whatever vegetables the store has that are worth buying. Take Ruth with you so she can carry." There was a silence. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She heard him move away from the doorway. She heard Ruth's footsteps following. She heard the front door open and close. And then it was just her and James and Nell and Emma and Samuel and the fire and the smell of salt pork starting to do what salt pork does when it finally has heat and attention paid to it. "Can you set a table?" she asked Nell. Nell nodded shyly. "I'll show you where things are," Emma said with a confidence that told Hazel this small girl had been watching every adult in her life for long enough to know exactly where things were. They set the table. They cooked supper. Samuel fell asleep against Hazel's shoulder, somewhere in the middle of it, worn out from the long cry and the first full stomach he'd had in she didn't want to think about how long. She transferred him to a folded blanket near the warmth of the stove and kept one eye on him while she managed the pot. She still didn't know if she was staying. She hadn't decided anything, but supper was happening and a baby was sleeping, and 2 small girls were carrying plates to a table, and James' suspicious, watchful James had refilled the water bucket a 3rd time without being asked at all. By the time Cole and Ruth came back with milk and a few carrots and a sorry-looking onion that was doing its best, the table was set, and there was something in the pot that smelled like food. Ruth stopped in the doorway and stared at the kitchen, as though it had been rearranged while she wasn't looking, which it had in every way that mattered. "Sit down," Hazel said to all of them, "before it gets cold." They sat. Cole Mercer sat at the head of the table and looked at the food on it, and then at Hazel standing at the stove, and his expression was something she couldn't read yet, some complicated arrangement of gratitude and guilt, and something else she didn't have a name for yet. She filled the plates. She sat down last across from Emma, who immediately reached across the table and patted her hand once quick like sealing something. Supper was quiet mostly. James ate with the focused intensity of a child who had been underfed and wasn't taking any chances. Nell watched Hazel more than she ate, until Hazel told her gently that the food would wait while she looked. Emma ate quickly and kept trying to feed Samuel small bites of softened cornmeal, which he accepted with the grave seriousness of an infant who has figured out that this was how survival worked. Ruth ate like someone who hadn't let herself be hungry in a long time, like she'd been rationing herself out of habit and couldn't quite stop yet. Hazel watched all of it, noted all of it, filed it away in the careful, methodical part of her mind that had always been good at this, at seeing what a situation actually was underneath what it was presenting itself as. What this situation was underneath all the dust and the neglect and the crying baby and the silent man at the head of the table. It was 5 children who were doing their best to survive the loss of their mother in a house where the adult had also, in his own way, stopped functioning. It was a 12-year-old girl who had been carrying a weight that would have bent a grown woman, and a 9-year-old boy who had decided that suspicion was safer than hope, and 2 little girls who were still, despite everything, looking at this stranger at their table with something that hadn't quite given up yet, and a baby who had stopped crying. "Thank you," Cole Mercer said, across the table, to her. The first words he'd addressed directly to her since she'd told him to go to town. She looked at him. He was looking at the table again, the way he had in the front room, like he couldn't quite manage eye contact with anything that wasn't a flat surface. "Don't thank me for supper," she said. "We still need to talk." He nodded. "After," she said. He nodded again. Emma reached over and patted Hazel's hand again. This time she left it there. The children washed up after supper. Ruth organized them without being asked, moving James and Nell toward the dish basin with the efficient authority of a child who had been doing this so long it had become automatic. Hazel took Samuel and sat with him near the stove, watching him blink himself toward sleep again, and waited. When the children had gone upstairs, Ruth herding them up with quiet competence, Emma looking back twice at Hazel from the stairs, Cole Mercer sat down across from her at the table. She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what happened." He looked at his hands. "My wife, Catherine. She died in November, 7 months ago." "In childbirth?" she asked. She'd already suspected it, but she needed to hear him say it. "Yes." The word came out flat and final like a door closing. "Samuel was born fine. Catherine—" He stopped. It was fast. There wasn't time to— He stopped again. Hazel waited. "She ran everything," he said. "The house, the children, the accounts. I ran the cattle. She ran everything else. I didn't—" He looked up then briefly and looked back down. "I didn't know how much I didn't know until it was gone." "So you wrote an advertisement." "3 times, he said. 3 different women came. The first one left after 2 days. Said the children were unmanageable. The second one made it to 4 days. Said the house was beyond what she'd been told. The third—" He paused. "She stayed almost a week. Then she said she wasn't suited to a household this size and left on the Tuesday stage. And then you wrote to me." "Yes. Without telling me about the 5 children, without telling me about the baby, without telling me about the state of the house." She kept her voice level. She was not interested in anger for its own sake. Anger without purpose was just noise. But she wanted him to hear exactly what she was saying. "You told me, orderly household, Mr. Mercer." He didn't flinch from it. She respected that slightly. "I know," he said. "I knew nobody would come if I told the truth." "That is almost certainly correct," she said. "It is also exactly why I have every right to be on the first stage back to Santa Fe tomorrow morning." He said nothing. What was there to say? "I have $32, she said. "That is all I have in the world. I spent the rest of my money getting here on the strength of a letter that described a situation that does not exist. I left behind—" She stopped. "Let that go. I came because I needed steady work and a place to be. What you have here is not steady. It is the opposite of steady. It is a house in the middle of falling apart with 5 children and no infrastructure, and a man who has been surviving instead of living for 7 months." He sat there and listened to every word. His jaw was tight, but he didn't argue. "So I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I want an honest answer. Not the answer you think will make me stay. An honest one. Can you do that?" He met her eyes. First time since she'd arrived that he'd managed it for more than a second. His eyes were dark and very tired, and there was something behind the tiredness that she thought might have been once a different kind of man. "I'll try," he said. "What do you actually need?" she asked. "Not what you put in the letter. What do you actually need?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Someone to hold it together," he said finally. While I figure out how to be what they need. The children. I know I've—" He stopped, swallowed. "I know I've failed at it. I wasn't made for it the way she was. I didn't know that until—" He stopped again. "How much can you pay?" she asked. He told her a number. It was not generous, but it was not insulting either. "I'll need my own room," she said. "A proper one, not a cupboard. I'll need the budget for the household in my control. I'll account for every cent, but I need to be the one managing it. I'll need your word that you'll back me when I say something needs doing. Not wait 3 weeks while it gets worse. And I'll need you to be straight with me, from here on. No more letters that say orderly. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not quite relief, too complicated for relief. More like a man standing in the wreckage of something who has just seen in the distance the vague outline of a tool that might be useful. You'd stay, he said. Less a question than a thing he was testing the weight of. I haven't decided yet, she said. I'm telling you what staying would require. He held her gaze this time. All right, he said. All right. All of it. She nodded. She stood up. She picked up Samuel, who stirred and settled against her shoulder without waking. I'm going to put him down, she said. And then I'm going to find out where they've put me to sleep, and I'm going to get some rest. Tomorrow we start. Early. There's a lot of ground to cover before this house is running right. She was at the kitchen doorway before he spoke again. Miss Carter. She stopped. Why? He said. Not belligerently, genuinely. You could leave. You said yourself you have every right to. So why? She thought about Emma's hand. Those small fingers wrapped around hers, the way a child reaches for something without language, because language hasn't caught up to the need yet. Because your daughter took my hand, she said, and I don't walk away from things that hold on. She went upstairs. Cole Mercer sat at the empty table for a long time after she'd gone looking at the cleared dishes, and the swept floor, and the pot soaking clean in the basin, and for the first time in 7 months. For the first time since November, the silence in the house did not feel entirely like emptiness. It felt like something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. But it was there. Hazel was up before the sun. Not because she had slept well. She hadn't. The room they'd given her was small, and the mattress had seen better decades, and somewhere around midnight, a floorboard in the hall had creaked in a way that suggested someone small was standing on it, listening and then stopping when she'd gone still. But she had slept enough. She had learned in the years since her father got sick, and the years of working other people's houses to sleep the way soldiers slept in the stories she'd heard efficiently, without luxury, and ready to move. She was dressed and had the kitchen fire going before the house woke up around her. That was when she understood the first real truth about the Mercer Ranch. The house didn't wake up the way a normal household woke up. There was no gradual stirring. No smell of coffee pulling people downstairs, no particular order to it. What happened instead was that the children descended whenever they descended in whatever order their individual internal clocks and courage levels dictated, and they managed themselves until someone or something intervened. For 7 months, that someone had been Ruth. Now Ruth came downstairs at 6:15 and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when she saw the fire already going, and Hazel standing at the stove with her sleeves rolled up, and Samuel balanced on her hip, still in his nightclothes, examining the wooden spoon with the grave scientific interest of a 7-month-old who has discovered that everything is potentially edible. Ruth stared. "Sit down," Hazel said. "You don't have to manage breakfast this morning." Ruth didn't sit down immediately. She stood in the doorway with that careful, watchful expression she wore like a second skin. The expression of someone who has been the responsible one for so long that being told to stop feels more like a threat than a relief. "I usually do the porridge," Ruth said. "I know. I found the pot you use. Sit down, Ruth." A beat. Then Ruth pulled out a chair and sat folding her hands on the table in front of her with the particular stillness of a child who doesn't know what to do with her hands when they aren't working. "How long have you been doing breakfast?" Hazel asked. "Since November," Ruth said. "Papa tries sometimes, but he—" She stopped. Chose her words carefully the way children do when they're being loyal and honest at the same time, and those two things are pulling in different directions. "He forgets to finish things." Hazel absorbed that. She stirred the pot. "What about before that? Before November? What did mornings look like?" Ruth's whole face changed when she talked about before November. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for dramatic. But something around her eyes shifted, softened, like a door opening a crack onto a different room. "Mama used to sing," she said. "Not loud. just while she was cooking. She had this one song she sang every morning. I don't even know what it was called. She just sang it. What was your mother's name? Catherine, Ruth said. Everyone called her Cat. Hazel filed that away. Your father mentioned her, she said. Said she ran everything. She did. No bitterness in it, just fact. Papa's good at the cattle. He's good at the land. But the house, the children, that was Mama. When she was gone... Ruth stopped, looked at her hands. He tried. He really did at first. But it was like he knew what needed doing, but he couldn't make himself do it. Like the wires got cut somewhere between knowing and doing. It was one of the most precise descriptions of grief Hazel had ever heard, and it had come out of a 12-year-old. That's a very accurate way to put it, Hazel said. Ruth looked up surprised, as if she'd expected to be corrected rather than agreed with. James came down next at 6:40, still suspicious, but drawn by the smell of something real on the stove. He stood in the doorway, in almost exactly the same spot Ruth had stood, and gave Hazel the same assessing look. And then he did something she hadn't expected. He went straight to the water bucket without being asked, and checked the level, and went to refill it at the pump. She made a note of that. Nell came down, holding Emma's hand, which seemed to be their standard configuration. Nell slightly behind Emma, slightly ahead, Emma doing most of the navigating for both of them. Emma came straight to Hazel and pressed her face briefly against Hazel's arm in a gesture that was so matter-of-fact about its own affection that it somehow hit harder than if it had been dramatic. Then she pulled back and looked up. You're still here, Emma said. I'm still here, Hazel said. Emma accepted this with a nod, as though it confirmed something she'd been running calculations on since last night. Cole Mercer came down at 7 and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the sight of 5 children at a table with food in front of them, and a fire going, and a baby in a makeshift nest of folded blankets near the warmth of the stove. And he stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorframe, and his expression doing something complicated and private that Hazel was careful not to watch too directly. There's coffee, she said. He poured himself a cup and sat at the end of the table and ate what she put in front of him without comment, and the meal was the most functional thing Hazel had seen happen in this house since she'd arrived. It lasted exactly 11 minutes before it fell apart. It started with James. James had been watching Cole across the table with that measuring look he wore, the look that said he was running some ongoing internal assessment of the adults in his life and hadn't reached a favorable conclusion yet. And then, out of nowhere, in the middle of eating his porridge, he said, Papa, the north fence is still down. Cole set down his coffee cup. I know. You said last week you'd fix it. I know, James. 2 of the Harmon cattle got in through there yesterday. Ned Harmon came by while you were in town, and he wasn't happy about it. There was a silence. Hazel kept her attention on Samuel and let it play out. I'll fix it today, Cole said. You said that last week, James said. James. Ruth's voice warning. I'm just saying what's true, James said, not backing down, not raising his voice either. Just that flat factual delivery that said, I have been watching this situation deteriorate, and someone has to say the words out loud. The fence is down, and the Harmon cattle keep getting in, and sooner or later, Ned Harmon is going to come back when he's had a drink, and then it'll be more than talking. Cole looked at his son across the table. Something moved in his face, not anger, not defensiveness. More like a man being confronted with an accurate assessment of his own failure by someone who loves him enough to say it, and that is perhaps the hardest kind to sit with. I'll fix it today, Cole said. Quieter this time, meaning it differently. I can help, James said immediately, and Hazel understood then that the whole thing had not been an attack. It had been a negotiation. James wanting to be useful. James wanting to be let in. James conducting the only kind of conversation he'd figured out how to have with his father, which was the practical problem-focused kind, because the other kind hadn't worked. After breakfast, Cole said. You can help. Something in James's shoulders dropped a fraction. Hazel said nothing. She was beginning to understand the architecture of this family, not just the practical chaos of it, but the emotional load-bearing walls, the places that had cracked, and the places that were still holding. She was going to need to be very careful about which walls she leaned on. The first collision of the day came at 8:30. It came from Nell. Nell, who was 7 and had been quiet all morning, who ate her breakfast and kept her eyes on her plate, and seemed on the surface to be the easiest of the 5. At 8:30, she came to find Hazel in the kitchen, where Hazel was taking inventory of the shelves with the systematic focus of a general assessing terrain before a campaign, and Nell stood in the doorway and said in a voice so small it was almost not there, "Today is Wednesday." Hazel turned. "It is," she said. "Mama always braided my hair on Wednesdays," Nell said. And then her face did the thing that small children's faces do when they have said the sentence that broke the dam. It crumpled all at once completely. And she made a sound that was not crying, and was not crying, and was somehow worse than both. Hazel set down her inventory list. She crossed the kitchen and crouched down in front of Nell and put her hands on both of the girls' shoulders. "Tell me how she did it," Hazel said. Nell blinked. "What?" "Your mama. Tell me how she braided your hair. Did she start at the top or the sides? Did she do a single braid or two?" Nell stared at her, thrown off the edge of the grief by the specificity of the question. "2," she said. "She always did 2. And she'd start—" She reached up and touched the side of her own head. "She'd start here, and she'd sing that song. The same one Ruth told me about." Nell nodded. "All right," Hazel said. "Go get your brush and find me a chair. I can't promise you the song because I don't know it. But I can do the 2 braids." Nell went for the brush at a pace that was almost running. Hazel stood up and stood very still for a moment before she followed. She was not the children's mother. She was not Catherine. She was not going to pretend otherwise, and she was not going to let anyone pretend it for her, because that kind of pretending ended in damage, always, always. But she was here, and she had hands that knew how to braid, and a 7-year-old girl was asking for something she could actually give, so she would give it. That was all. That was enough for right now. She braided Nell's hair at the kitchen table, and Nell sat perfectly still the whole time, which Hazel suspected she had not managed to do for 7 months of mornings. And when it was done, Nell ran her fingers over both braids with a careful measuring touch, like she was checking the fact of them. And then she said, "Thank you," in that almost not there voice, and slipped out of the kitchen without looking back. Emma appeared in the doorway approximately 45 seconds later. "Can you braid mine too?" she asked. "Sit down," Hazel said. Ruth appeared 30 seconds after Emma. "Sit down," Hazel said without turning around. There was a pause, and then the scrape of a chair. Cole Mercer came through the kitchen to collect James for the fence work around 9, and he stopped when he saw all 3 girls in a row with their backs to him and Hazel moving between them, braiding with the efficient speed of someone who had done this before, and the look that crossed his face was so raw and so fast that Hazel nearly missed it. But she didn't. She saw it. And she understood it, and she said nothing about it because some things a person needs to feel without being watched feeling them. The 3 of them left for the fence. The kitchen got quieter. And that was when Hazel sat down with Samuel and really looked at him. She'd been looking at him since she'd arrived in the practical sense, registering that he was undersized, that his color wasn't quite right, that he was eating but not thriving. But sitting down and holding him in the morning light with the house quiet around her, she could see it more clearly. He was pale in a way that concerned her. His eyes were alert, but his energy was low. He didn't reach for things the way a healthy 7-month-old should reach. When she pressed her finger into his palm, he gripped it, but not with the fierce, reflexive grip of a well-fed baby. More the grip of one who had learned to hold on carefully, conserving effort. "Ruth," she said. Ruth was cleaning the breakfast dishes. She turned. "Has Samuel seen a doctor since he was born?" Ruth's hands went still in the basin. "Once," she said. "A few weeks after. The doctor in Harlow Creek. He said Samuel was—" She stopped. "He said he was healthy enough." "Healthy enough," Hazel said. "He didn't say anything about—" Ruth's voice was tight now, that careful tightness of someone who has been worried about something for a long time and hasn't let themselves name it. "Is something wrong with him?" "I don't know yet," Hazel said. Honest. She had decided the night before that she would be honest with these children in the way that adults so rarely were with children, which was completely and without varnishing. "He's smaller than I'd expect for his age, and his energy is low. It might be that he just hasn't been eating right. 7 months of cornmeal mush isn't what he needs, but I want to take him to the doctor in town and have him looked at properly." Ruth put down the dish she was holding. Her voice came out smaller than usual. "I've been doing the best I could." "I know that," Hazel said, sharply, clearly. "Ruth, look at me." Ruth looked. "What you've done for this family for 7 months is something most grown women couldn't have managed. Don't you sit there and hear me say Samuel needs a doctor, and make it mean something it doesn't mean. It means he needs a doctor. That is all it means." Ruth's jaw worked. She nodded once quick. "Good," Hazel said. "Now, tell me about the other children. Tell me who they are. Not what they do, who they are." Ruth looked at her for a moment, surprised again by the question. Then she pulled the other chair out and sat down across from Hazel. And Samuel reached across toward the sound of Ruth's voice, and Ruth gave him her finger to hold, and then she started talking. Ruth was 12, and had been the oldest by enough years that she'd always been in some sense a caretaker, even before November, but it had been a lighter role than one she'd worn like a suggestion rather than a sentence. She was sharp and organized, and she felt everything much more than she showed. And the thing she was most afraid of Hazel would come to understand was that she would forget her mother. Not in the big ways, in the small ones. The song. The exact color of Catherine's hair. The particular way she'd said Ruth's name when she was proud of her. James was 9, and had his father's stubbornness turned up to an intensity that his father's quieter temperament had been able to hold in check, and since November there had been no one to hold it in check, so it had been coming out in the kind of sideways practical confrontation Hazel had witnessed at breakfast. He had been closer to Cole before November. Whatever had broken in Cole had also broken something in James, not the love, but the access to it. They were both still there on either side of a wall that had gone up in grief, and neither of them quite knew how to take it down. Nell was 7 and felt everything and showed it, and then was embarrassed that she'd shown it, and then felt everything again in a cycle that had no natural stopping point. She was also, Ruth said, the one who could draw. She'd been drawing since she was 4, filling the edges of any paper she could find with small, precise pictures of things she'd seen. Since November, Ruth said quietly she'd been drawing their mother over and over, trying to get her right. Emma was 5 and had, through some combination of temperament and circumstance, arrived at a philosophy about life that could be summarized as, things are as they are, and you make the best of what's in front of you, and there is no point in pretending otherwise. She had attached to Hazel with a speed and completeness that should have been alarming, but somehow wasn't, because it wasn't desperation Hazel was beginning to understand. It was Emma's version of assessment. She had looked at Hazel and decided, and Emma once decided, did not second-guess herself. And Samuel was 7 months old and had come into the world at the cost of the person most essential to the world he arrived in, and he did not know any of this, and Hazel held him and thought that there was something almost unbearably tender about that, about the not knowing and the reaching anyway. She was still sitting there with him when a knock came at the front door. Ruth went to answer it, and Hazel heard the voices from the kitchen. Ruth's careful, polite greeting, and then a woman's voice, louder than necessary, with the particular carrying quality of someone who doesn't mind being overheard. "I've come to call on Cole Mercer," the voice said. "I heard he'd hired another woman." Hazel rose with Samuel on her hip and walked to the front room doorway. The woman in the doorway was somewhere in her late 30s, dressed well by the standards of Harlow Creek, with the kind of pressed, deliberate appearance that spoke of effort and intention. She was not unkind-looking exactly, but she had the bearing of someone who was accustomed to being the authority in most rooms she entered, and she was looking at Hazel with an expression that was working very hard to be merely curious and not managing it entirely. "You must be the new housekeeper," the woman said. "Hazel Carter," Hazel said. "And you are—" "Margaret Sowers. My husband owns the feed store in town. Cole and my husband have done business together for years." She looked at Samuel, then at Hazel, then at the room behind Hazel, taking inventory, the way people do when they're assessing something they've decided to have an opinion about. "I see you've gotten the baby up and about. I've been bringing food by from time to time. When I could." "That was kind of you," Hazel said. "The children have been managing on their own a great deal," Margaret said. There was something embedded in it. Not quite accusation, not quite sympathy. "Harlow Creek has been concerned about the family." "Concerned," Hazel said. "Well, 5 children and an infant and a man who—" Margaret glanced at Ruth, who was standing very still near the stairs, and recalibrated. "Who has been going through a difficult period. People have wondered whether something ought to be done." Hazel looked at Margaret Sowers steadily. "Something is being done?" she said. "I'm doing it." Margaret blinked. She hadn't expected that, the directness of it, the lack of apology. "Yes, well, how long are you planning to stay?" "The last 3 didn't." "Mrs. Sowers," Hazel said, not unkindly, but not particularly warmly. "Either I appreciate that Harlow Creek has been concerned about this family. They have 5 children who've needed more than they've had, and concern is appropriate. But I'm here now, and I have work to do, and if you'll excuse me, this baby needs to be fed." Margaret Sowers looked at her for a moment with an expression that was cycling rapidly through several things. Surprise reassessment, something that might have been the beginning of respect, but hadn't decided yet. "Well," Margaret said, "I'll let Cole know I stopped by." "I'll tell him myself," Hazel said. "Good morning, Mrs. Sowers." She held the door. Margaret left. Ruth from the stairs said, "Nobody talks to Mrs. Sowers like that." "Somebody should have started sooner," Hazel said. She closed the door. "Come help me get Samuel's food ready." The fence got fixed. Cole and James came back at noon with the particular satisfied tiredness of 2 people who have done a thing together that needed doing, and Hazel registered the fractional difference in James's posture, the way he was walking slightly closer to his father than he'd been walking that morning, and noted it without comment. She put lunch on the table. Cole ate. Then he said, "Margaret Sowers came by." "I know. I answered the door." He looked at her across the table. "She say anything?" "She said Harlow Creek has been concerned," Hazel said. "I told her something was being done. She left." Another one of those looks. The complicated expression ones she was beginning to catalog. "She means well," he said. "Most people who say things that aren't their business mean well," Hazel said. "That doesn't make the things their business." James made a sound that was almost not quite a laugh, the first one she'd heard from him. Cole looked at his son. James looked down at his plate, but his mouth was doing something that might in better times have been the beginning of a grin. The crisis hit at 2 in the afternoon. It started with Samuel. Hazel had put him down for his afternoon rest in the basket she'd arranged near the kitchen, and she was in the middle of beating out one of the front room rugs, which had needed beating since what appeared to be approximately the previous year, when she heard Ruth scream her name from inside. Not a child alarm scream, a real one. She was through the front door and back in the kitchen in under 10 seconds. Samuel was in Ruth's arms. He was breathing. That was the first thing she checked, but his color was wrong, a grayish pale that was not his usual color, and his eyes were half open in a way that didn't look like sleep. Ruth was holding him with the rigid, electrified terror of someone who has picked up something wrong and knows it. He was making a sound. Ruth said, her voice stripped of everything except the fear. Not a normal sound. And then he stopped and I picked him up and he felt different. He felt... Hazel was already taking Samuel from Ruth's arms, her hands moving over him fast and sure, checking his temperature, his pulse, the quality of his breathing, the responsiveness of his eyes. He was warm. Too warm. His pulse was fast but regular. He was conscious. His eyes tracked her hand when she moved it. "Fever," she said. "He has a fever. It came up fast." "Is he going to—" Ruth couldn't finish the sentence. "He's breathing fine," Hazel said. "His pulse is strong. He needs the doctor. Right now." She was already moving toward the front room. "Where's your father?" "He went back out to the north pasture after lunch." "James?" Hazel raised her voice. In 2 seconds, James appeared at the top of the stairs. "Go get your father. North pasture. Run." James ran. She heard the door bang. "Ruth," Hazel said, still moving, still holding Samuel with one arm reaching for her coat on the hook by the door. "Stay with Nell and Emma. Do not let them come outside. I'll take Samuel to town." "By yourself." "I've done harder things alone." She had the door open. "Stay with your sisters." She made it to town in 40 minutes, which was faster than the distance reasonably allowed for on foot with a baby, and she did not think about the distance or the heat or the weight of her arms. She thought about Samuel's breathing, which she checked every few minutes, still regular, still there, and about the feeling of his small back under her hand, and about the particular quality of a child who is sick and trusting you to do something about it. The doctor's name was Ellis. He was older with wire spectacles and the deliberate movements of a man who had practiced calm as a professional tool. He took Samuel from Hazel and examined him with the thorough quiet of someone who knew what he was doing, and Hazel stood 2 feet away and watched every movement of his hands, and kept herself very still. "Fever," Dr. Ellis said. "Not dangerously high yet, but climbing. He's dehydrated. This child has not been getting adequate nutrition." "I know," Hazel said. "I've only been there since yesterday." He looked up at her over his spectacles. "You're the new housekeeper." "Yes." "3 others before you." "So I've heard." He went back to examining Samuel. "This child needs better feeding, more fat, more variety. He's been surviving but not thriving. You can see it in his weight and his color. The fever is likely a simple infection common in infants, and if we bring it down and get more nutrition into him over the next weeks, he should come right." He looked up again. "You planning to stay?" "That's the second time today someone's asked me that," Hazel said. "It's a reasonable question. I'm here, aren't I?" she said. Ellis almost smiled. "He needs willow bark tea. I'll give you what you need. Plenty of fluids. And he needs feeding every 2 hours until the fever breaks. Not cornmeal. Get the milk, mix it with a little honey if you can find it." "I can find it," Hazel said. She would find it. She would manufacture it if she had to. She was at the door with Samuel and the willow bark and a list of instructions in her head when Dr. Ellis spoke again. "Miss Carter?" She turned. "The Mercer children have been—" He paused, choosing words. "This town has not handled this situation as well as it might have. There's been talk about whether the children should be placed elsewhere, with other families. Split up." The words landed in her chest like something cold. "That is not going to happen," she said. Ellis nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer and approved of it. "Then do what you're doing," he said, "and do it fast before the talking turns into something more official." She walked back to the ranch in the heat of the afternoon with Samuel against her chest, and that conversation sitting in her skull like a stone, and she thought split up. 5 children. Split across 5 different families, scattered through the territory like seeds with no root. Ruth separated from James, from Nell, from Emma, from Samuel. The thought was so specifically terrible that she stopped on the road for a moment and just held Samuel tighter and made herself breathe. Then she started walking again. Faster. Cole was on the porch when she got back. He'd come back from the north pasture and gone straight there. She could tell he had the look of a man who had been told something alarming by a 9-year-old running at full speed, and had spent the intervening time being unable to do anything about it, which was its own specific kind of agony. He came off the porch before she'd reached the gate. "How is he?" Cole's voice was stripped raw in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. "He'll be all right," she said. "Fever, dehydration. Dr. Ellis gave me what I need, He'll need close watching tonight. Cole reached for Samuel. His hands, big, rough, ranch-hardened, took the baby with a tenderness that was so at odds with everything else about him that it stopped Hazel for a moment. He held Samuel against his chest and looked down at his son's face with an expression that had no composure left in it at all. And Hazel looked away because this was private. This was a man and his son, and the terror of almost, and she had no business watching it. "He's going to be fine," she said again to the fence post. "I should have." Cole started, stopped. "Yes," Hazel said. Not unkindly, just honestly. "You should have taken him to Ellis weeks ago, but you didn't, and here we are, and he's going to be fine." Cole looked up. "You're not going to—" "No," she said. "I'm not going to lecture you. I just told you the truth. There's a difference." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. She walked past him toward the house. She had willow bark tea to make and milk to heat, and a baby's fever to bring down before nightfall. "Miss Carter," he said behind her. She stopped, didn't turn this time. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded different from the thank you at supper last night. That one had been the beginning of something. This one was deeper, like it was coming from somewhere further down. "Don't thank me," she said for the second time. "Just fix the fence before Ned Harmon comes back." She went inside. The rest of the afternoon was organized chaos. Hazel had Samuel's fever treatment running inside while simultaneously directing the kitchen with James's assistance. James, who had somewhere between the morning's fence work and running to the north pasture and back, apparently decided that Hazel was something worth paying attention to and had shifted from watchful suspicion to watchful cooperation, which was its own kind of progress. Nell appeared at her elbow mid-afternoon with a folded piece of paper, which she held out without saying anything. Hazel took it, unfolded it. It was a drawing careful, precise, done in pencil on the back of what appeared to be an old feed receipt. It showed a figure that Hazel recognized after a moment as herself, a large woman with her hair up, holding a baby standing in a kitchen doorway. The proportions were off, in the way child drawings are always slightly off. But the hands Hazel's hands holding the baby were done with such specific care that they were exactly right. She looked up at Nell. "Is that me?" she asked. Nell nodded. "You drew this today?" Nell nodded again. "It's very good," Hazel said. And she meant it with the kind of straight plainness that is better than enthusiasm, because it sounds like truth. Nell almost smiled. It was the nearest she'd come to it since Hazel had arrived. Hazel folded the drawing and put it in her apron pocket. Emma saw her do it and looked satisfied, as though this confirmed something she'd been telling herself. By evening, Samuel's fever had dropped to something less alarming. Not gone, it would take another day, maybe two, before he was fully right, but the edge was off it, and he was taking fluid well. And when Hazel laid him in his basket near the stove after his 8 o'clock feeding, he went to sleep with the particular heaviness of a baby who is sick but being taken care of, which is a different kind of heaviness from one who is sick and not. Supper was quiet again, but differently quiet than it had been the night before. Last night's quiet had been the quiet of strangers managing proximity. Tonight's had something else in it, something that was beginning to take shape at the edges, that wasn't yet a name, but was working toward one. The children went up to bed, Ruth last pausing at the foot of the stairs. "Will you check on him?" she asked, meaning Samuel. "Twice tonight," Hazel said. "Go sleep, Ruth. You don't have to be awake for it." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then, without any drama, without any particular ceremony, she said, "I'm glad you didn't leave this morning." "I told Emma I was staying," Hazel said. "Emma told me," Ruth said. "But you hadn't told me yet." "Well," Hazel said, "now you know." Ruth went upstairs. Cole was still at this table. He hadn't left when the children did, and she hadn't asked him to. He had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, and he was looking at the table with that somewhere to the left of here gaze. "Ellis told me something," Hazel said. She hadn't decided to tell him this tonight. She'd thought maybe she'd wait, give herself time to think about how to say it. But looking at him sitting there, she thought he needed to hear it now. "About the children." He said there's been talk in town about placing them, separately, with other families. Cole's head came up fast. They can't do that, he said, low, hard. They can do a lot of things if they decide a household is unfit, Hazel said. And this household 2 days ago was not fit. I'm their father. I know that. And I'm telling you what Ellis told me because you need to know what's at stake. This isn't just about getting the house in order, Mr. Mercer. It's about keeping this family in one piece. He stared at her. The tired, hollow look was still there, but something had shifted behind it, an urgency that had been buried 7 months under the weight of grief and had just been given a reason to surface. What do I need to do? He said. Be here, Hazel said, simply. I'll handle the house, but you need to be present for those children. James is 9 years old, and he fixed a fence today because it was the only way he could think to reach you. Ruth has been running herself empty for 7 months trying to hold things together because she doesn't know what else to do. Nell is drawing pictures of her dead mother every night trying to remember her face. And Emma. She stopped. Emma reached for the first adult who didn't run. That's all she knows to do. Cole's jaw was working. She could see it. I know, he said in a voice that was barely there. I know I lost when Catherine... He stopped, put his hands flat on the table. I lost more than I knew how to account for. I know, Hazel said, less harshly than before. I buried both my parents inside a year. I understand what it does. He looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. Then you know, he said, that it doesn't just hurt, it takes things, pieces of how you function, parts of yourself you didn't know you needed until they were gone. Yes, she said, and I know that the only way back is through, not around. Through. She stood up. Start tomorrow. Breakfast with the children. All of you at the table, not managing being there. He nodded. She went to check on Samuel. The baby was sleeping, breathing evenly, his small chest rising and falling with the mechanical reliability of a thing that has decided to keep going. Hazel stood over him for a moment and listened to the house settle around her. The old wood speaking in its language of creaks and shifts. The night wind outside the faint sound of someone upstairs, who might have been Ruth, still awake, or might have been the house breathing. She was still not certain she was staying. She told herself that, but she checked Samuel's temperature with the back of her hand and adjusted his blanket and stood there a moment longer than necessary. And when she finally left the kitchen, she moved quietly. The way you move in a house where sleeping things shouldn't be disturbed. The way you move when you have started without deciding to think of it as yours. Samuel's fever broke on the third morning. Hazel knew it before she even touched him. She'd gotten up twice in the night to check. And by the second time, somewhere around 3 in the morning, the quality of his breathing had changed. Less labored, more settled. The small papery heat coming off his skin had softened into something closer to normal, and when she laid her hand on his forehead, he stirred and turned his face toward her palm, the way babies turn toward warmth instinctively, without calculation. She stood in the dark kitchen and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 days. By morning, he was awake and fussing for food with an insistence that was the most reassuring sound she'd heard since she'd arrived. She fed him at the kitchen table while the house was still quiet around her, and Samuel ate with a focus that suggested his appetite had made up its mind to compensate for lost time. And Hazel watched him and thought, All right then. We're past that. She didn't let herself feel relief for very long. Relief was a luxury for people who had fewer things on their list. Cole came down at 6 and saw Samuel sitting up in Hazel's arms, batting at her coffee cup with uncoordinated enthusiasm. And he stopped in the kitchen doorway, and something in his face went very still in the way that faces go still when emotion moves through them, too fast to be managed. Fever's gone, Hazel said. Cole crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and took his son from her arms and held him up and looked at him. Really looked at him the way he hadn't been able to in the tight, frightened way of the last 2 days. And Samuel grabbed his father's beard with both fists and pulled, and Cole made a sound that was close to a laugh, and was something much more complicated than a laugh. All right, Cole said softly. To Samuel, not to Hazel. All right, son. You gave us a scare. Hazel picked up her coffee and looked out the window and gave them a minute. It was Cole himself who ended it. He settled Samuel against his shoulder and turned back to the kitchen with the expression of a man who has been somewhere private and is returning. What needs doing today? He asked. It was the first time he'd asked her that. She registered it without making anything of it. The pantry, she said. I need to take full stock. Then we need to talk about what to order from town and how often. And you need to sit with the children at breakfast. I sit at breakfast. You sit at the end of the table and you eat, Hazel said. That's not the same thing. James has been trying to talk to you about the north fence for 2 weeks by telling you about cattle. Ruth answers questions, but you haven't asked her one. Nell doesn't speak at meals at all. She paused. They need you present, not just physically located. He held her gaze. You don't pull your punches, do you? I pulled them with the letter, she said. You saw how that worked. He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but it was the closest she'd seen. They sat at breakfast, all 7 of them, and Hazel watched Cole try. It was imperfect, and it was visible, and she respected both of those things. He asked James about a horse James had been training, a young roan that James had mentioned in passing 2 days ago, and Cole had clearly been storing the information, and James, caught off guard by the question, answered with an enthusiasm that he immediately tried to dial back to something more cautious but didn't quite manage. He asked Nell what she'd been drawing, and Nell went crimson and said nothing at all, and Emma said, She drew Miss Hazel holding Samuel. And Nell went a darker shade of crimson, and Cole said, I'd like to see it sometime, quietly and without pressure. And Nell looked at her plate for a moment, and then said, Maybe, in her almost not there voice, which was the most she'd offered voluntarily at a meal since Hazel had arrived. Ruth watched all of this with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a train and isn't yet ready to believe it's actually pulling in. Hazel said nothing. She cut Samuel's food into pieces small enough to be safe and let the morning happen around her. The first real test came that afternoon, and it came from the direction she least expected. She was in the middle of the pantry inventory, a task she'd been putting off because she'd known it was going to be worse than she wanted it to be. And she was right. It was worse. The shelves had the quality of something that had been slowly raided for 7 months without being restocked in any organized way, when she heard the sound of a wagon pulling up outside, and then a knock at the front door, sharp enough to mean business. She went to the door. The man on the porch was thick-built and somewhere in his 50s, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades in the New Mexico sun and hadn't forgiven it. He had his hat in his hands, which might have indicated politeness, except that the way he was holding it suggested he'd like to put it through something. Ned Harmon, he said. Not a question. Hazel Carter, she said. Mr. Mercer's housekeeper. He's out with the cattle. Can I help you? Harmon looked past her into the house with the particular boldness of a man who has decided he has a right to look wherever he likes. I've got 3 head of cattle that went through the Mercer fence last week, and 2 of them came back lame. I've been patient about this fence situation, but patience got its limits. The fence is fixed, Hazel said. He looked at her. Excuse me. The north fence. Cole and James fixed it 2 days ago. Whatever damage your cattle took from the gap, I'm sure Mr. Mercer will want to discuss fair compensation, but the fence is fixed. Harmon blinked. He'd come prepared for a different kind of conversation, the kind where nobody answered the door with a straight spine and a clear account of the facts. He recalibrated visibly. 2 head came back lame, he said again, but with slightly less momentum behind it. Then write down what you believe is owed and bring it to Cole Mercer when he's back from the pasture and he'll look at it, Hazel said. What time would be convenient for you tomorrow? Another blink. Afternoon, I reckon. Afternoon, then. Good afternoon, Mr. Harmon. She closed the door. Then she leaned against it for exactly 2 seconds, because her heart was going slightly faster than normal, and she had learned a long time ago that the way to handle people like Ned Harmon was to never let them see that you had a pulse. Then she went back to the pantry. Ruth appeared in the pantry doorway 10 minutes later. Was that Ned Harmon? It was. What did he want? What he always wanted is to be the largest thing in the room. Hazel moved 3 tins to the left and wrote something in the ledger she'd found in the kitchen desk. He'll come back tomorrow afternoon to talk to your father. Make sure Cole knows. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not scared of him. I'm scared of plenty of things, Hazel said. Ned Harmon isn't one of them. The last housekeeper, the third one she cried when he came by, Ruth said. He wasn't even mean exactly, he was just loud, Hazel said. People who rely on being loud depend on other people being quiet. It's a very simple equation. She turned and looked at Ruth. You're not scared of him either. I've watched you manage this house for 2 days. You know exactly what you're doing. Don't let someone with a loud voice convince you otherwise. Ruth was quiet again in the considering way she had. Then, Mama used to say something like that. Hazel turned back to the shelves. Smart woman, your mama? The crisis of the second week came in layers, which was harder than if it had come all at once. The first layer arrived on a Tuesday when Cole came in from the south pasture with his jaw set in the way it set when something had gone wrong. But he hadn't decided yet how to say it. And Hazel waited because she had learned that pressing Cole Mercer was like pressing clay before it was ready. You just pushed it sideways instead of shaping it. He told her at supper, after the children were upstairs. Water rights, he said. She looked at him. The creek that runs through the south quarter. There's a man, Aldous Brigg. He came up from Texas last year, bought the patent spread. He's been diverting water upstream. Legal or not, I don't know yet, but the flow's been down for 3 weeks, and I didn't put it together until today. Hazel set down her cup. How bad? Bad enough, Cole said. The cattle need that water. If it keeps at the current rate through summer, I'm going to be in trouble. What kind of trouble? He looked at the table. The kind where you sell cattle early and at bad prices to keep the rest of them alive. The kind that cuts into the year's income by... He stopped. By enough. Enough to what? She asked. He looked up. Enough to make things difficult. She heard what he wasn't saying. The children, the house, her own wages. She heard it all underneath the careful word, difficult. Have you talked to anyone in town? A lawyer. There's no lawyer in Harlow Creek. Nearest one's in Messia. Then write to Messia, she said. Tonight. It costs money to... It costs more to lose the water, she said. Write the letter Cole. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that crossed his face sometimes when she said things plainly, not offense, more like someone who has gotten used to every sentence having a hedge in it and keeps being surprised by the absence of one. Then he got up and found paper. She sat at the other end of the table and went through the household ledger while he wrote, and neither of them talked, and the lamp between them threw the same circle of light over both their work. And it was the first time Hazel had been aware concretely and without confusion that she was sitting in the same room as this man without wanting to leave it. She noted that, and she set it aside. There was too much else to manage. The second layer arrived on Wednesday. It arrived as a child, which most of the genuinely difficult things in the Mercer house did. James had been getting up early for 3 days in a row to help Cole with the morning feeding before school, which Hazel had noticed and approved of without commenting on, because commenting would have made James self-conscious about it, and he was the kind of child who didn't respond well to being observed in something he hadn't offered. But on Wednesday, he came down to breakfast with his face arranged in the careful, expressionless mask that meant something was wrong, and he ate without speaking. And when Cole asked him something direct, he answered in monosyllables and looked at the table. Hazel watched this from the stove and said nothing. It was Emma who cracked it open because Emma had no patience for mysteries that were ruining the breakfast atmosphere. James got in a fight, Emma announced. Every head at the table turned. James shot his little sister a look that should have turned her to stone. Emma was unimpressed. Yesterday after school. Emma continued with the serene certainty of a 5-year-old who considers all information public property. With Danny Sowers. Hazel looked at James. Margaret Sowers's boy. James's jaw went tight. It's nothing. What did he say? Hazel asked. I said it's nothing. James? Not sharp, just present. He looked at her, then he looked at the table. Then, because she had learned that if she waited long enough, James would talk, she waited. He said Papa couldn't manage his own house. James said finally to the table surface. Said the whole town knew it. Said... He stopped. Said what? Cole said. Quietly. James looked at his father. Said they ought to send us kids to live with proper families before we... He stopped again, swallowed. He said some other stuff too, but that was the main part. The table was very quiet. Cole's hands were flat on the surface of it. Hazel watched his face go through something anger and shame, and underneath both of them, something rawer and more essential. The particular agony of a father hearing that his failure has become his children's humiliation. What did you do? Cole asked. Hit him, James said. Twice. Ruth made a small sound. Did he hit you back? Cole asked. Once. I'm bigger. Cole looked at his son across the table for a long moment. Hazel thought he was going to say something about fighting about school, about the Sowers family, and town relations, and any number of things that would be appropriate and would land wrong. Instead, he said, You're not going anywhere. James looked up. None of you are going anywhere, Cole said. His voice had the quality of something that has been decided rather than something being discussed. This is your house. This is our family. And anybody who says otherwise... He stopped, looked at the table, then back at James. You shouldn't have hit him, but I understand why you did. James nodded. His jaw was still tight, but something around his eyes had changed. Danny Sowers is 12 years old, Hazel said into the quiet. What he said came from somewhere, probably from his mother's dinner table. She looked at James. People repeat what they hear. That doesn't make it true. Is it true? James asked. He was looking at her, and the question was direct in the way only a child's questions can be direct without armor, without hedging. Are they actually going to send us away? Hazel looked at him straight. Not if I have anything to say about it, she said. Do you have anything to say about it? More than they're expecting, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his fork. That afternoon, Hazel put on her good coat and walked into Harlow Creek by herself. She did not tell Cole where she was going, because Cole would have come with her, and the kind of conversation she intended to have worked better without a man present. Men in the company of other men talked around things. Women, talking to women in a small town, got to the point faster, provided you were willing to be the one who named the point first. She went to the feed store. Margaret Sowers was behind the counter because Margaret Sowers was always apparently behind the counter of the feed store, conducting the business of the town through the medium of supply orders and grain receipts. She looked up when Hazel came in. Her expression arranged itself into something that was trying to be welcoming. Miss Carter, she said. Mrs. Sowers. Hazel came to the counter. She did not lean on it. She stood at her full height, which was not imposing by the standards of most people, but which she had learned to use correctly. I'm here about your son and James Mercer. Margaret's expression shifted. My Danny came home with a bruise on his. Your Danny, Hazel said, told an 11-year-old boy whose mother died 7 months ago that the town planned to split his family up and send the children away. That's what earned him the bruise. The store was quiet. There was another woman at the far end, browsing flour. Hazel registered her, but didn't look at her. Margaret's chin came up. The town has been concerned. I know what the town has been concerned about, Hazel said. I heard it from Dr. Ellis. But concern and action are different things, Mrs. Sowers. The Mercer family is being managed. The children are being fed. The house is being run. The baby is healthy. Cole Mercer is present and working. She paused. What the Mercer family does not need is their children coming home from school having been told by other children Children who learned it at dinner that their family is about to be taken apart. Margaret opened her mouth. "I'm not here to argue," Hazel said. "I'm here to tell you directly so it can go back to wherever these conversations have been happening. The Mercer household is not unfit. Those children are not going anywhere. And I would appreciate it if that information replaced whatever the previous information was." A long silence. The woman at the far end of the store had stopped pretending to look at Flower. Margaret Sowers looked at Hazel for a long moment. Then something happened in her face that was complex and private, and took a moment to resolve itself into words. "You really are planning to stay," she said. "Yes," Hazel said. "I am." Another pause. Then Margaret said quieter something Hazel hadn't expected. "The last 3 who came, they talked to me about leaving before they left. Said the situation was impossible." She looked at the counter. "I told Catherine once before I told her that ranch was too much for one person to run. She said she wasn't running it alone." She looked up. She meant Cole, but maybe she meant I don't know what she meant. "Maybe she meant that a household isn't one person's problem," Hazel said. "It's everybody's." Margaret was quiet. "Tell your son," Hazel said, "that James Mercer isn't going anywhere, and that the next time he has a question about the Mercer family, he might try asking instead of announcing." She bought the cornmeal she'd come for as a secondary reason for the visit, and walked back to the ranch with it under her arm. She was halfway back when she heard the horse behind her. She turned. Cole pulled the roan up beside her and looked down. "You went to talk to Margaret Sowers." "Ruth told you," Hazel said. "Ruth told me." He paused. "How did it go?" "Fine," Hazel said. "The message will get around." He looked at her for a moment. "You could have told me. I could have gone. A man going to defend himself to his neighbor sounds like defensiveness," Hazel said. "A woman going to set the record straight sounds like confidence." She started walking. "Get off the horse if you want to talk." He swung down from the roan without hesitation and walked beside her, leading the horse by the reins. "Margaret's not a bad person," he said. "I know," Hazel said. "Bad people are less trouble. They don't mix genuine concern with their nosiness, and you always know what you're dealing with." He was quiet for a few paces. Then, "You've done this before. Managed things. People." "I've been managing things since I was 16, she said. "You get a feel for it." "Where did you learn?" She looked at the road ahead. "Necessity," she said. "Same as most things worth knowing." He didn't push further, and she didn't offer more. They walked the rest of the way back in a silence that was different from the silences of the first days, less like a wall between them, more like 2 people who had arrived without deciding to at a shared understanding of when talking was necessary and when it wasn't. The 3rd layer arrived on a Friday, and it was the hardest one. Hazel was putting Nell and Emma to bed, a routine that had established itself over the course of 10 days into something that had shape and weight to it, with Emma's insistence on a specific order of events. Glass of water, blanket, tucked left side, first, then right. Then a question about tomorrow, and Nell's quieter but equally specific requirement of having her braids taken down before sleep, when Nell said without preamble, looking at the ceiling, "Do you think Mama can see us?" Hazel was quiet for a moment. Emma turned to look at Hazel with full serious attention. "I think," Hazel said, choosing carefully, "that people who loved us don't stop loving us just because we can't see them anymore." Nell was quiet. "Do you think she's mad at Papa?" Nell asked. Hazel looked at the girl. "Why would she be mad at Papa?" "Because he forgot to be a papa for a while," Nell said. Very simply, not with accusation, with the matter-of-fact clarity of a child stating something she has been thinking about for 7 months and has not had anyone to say it to. He was here, but he forgot. Emma nodded, confirming this as established fact. Hazel sat on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes when people lose someone they love very much," she said, "they get so sad that the sadness takes up all the room inside them, and there isn't space left for anything else for a while. That doesn't mean they stopped loving. It means the love is stuck underneath the sad waiting to get out. Nell considered this. Like how water gets stuck under ice in winter. Exactly like that, Hazel said. And then the ice melts, Emma said with the conclusive tone of someone who has solved the problem. In spring. Yes, Hazel said. Emma nodded satisfied. She closed her eyes. Nell looked at the ceiling for a moment longer. Are you the spring? She asked. Hazel didn't answer immediately. She tucked the blanket right side, then left Emma's order reversed for Nell, which she'd noticed without being told, and smoothed it at the edges. Maybe, she said. Or maybe the spring was already coming. Maybe I just got here at the right time. She kissed Nell's forehead. She had not planned to do that. Her hand had moved before her mind caught up with it. Nell went very still, and then quietly turned her face into the pillow in the way children do when they are feeling something too large to look at directly. Hazel turned down the lamp and went out. In the hall, she stood still for a moment with her hand on the wall and breathed. She had told herself every day since she arrived that she was not staying forever. That this was a position, a job, a thing she was doing until she had enough saved to do the next thing, whatever the next thing turned out to be. She had told herself that the children were not hers, and the house was not hers, and the feeling she got sometimes in the kitchen with Samuel on her hip, and the fire going, and all 5 of them at the table, was not home. It was just proximity. Warmth borrowed from someone else's life. She stood in the hall, and Nell's question sat in her chest like something with weight. Are you the spring? She went downstairs. Cole was at the table. She had begun to understand that Cole sat at the table in the evenings the way some men sat on porches, not waiting for anything exactly, but using the time to let the day settle into something he could live with. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him. Nell asked me if her mother could still see them, she said. Cole looked up. She also asked me if Catherine was angry at you, Hazel said. Because you forgot to be a papa, she said, for a while. He closed his eyes. Opened them. She said that, he said, not a question. She's been thinking it for 7 months, Hazel said. She just hadn't had anyone to say it to. She wrapped both hands around her cup. You should talk to them about her, Catherine. Tell them things about her. Not just the big things, the small things. The songs she sang, the way she did things. If you don't tell them, the details are going to fade, and they're going to spend the rest of their lives trying to remember and getting it slightly wrong, and that's a particular kind of loss that doesn't ever fully heal. Cole was very still across from her. I can't, he started. Stopped. Every time I try to talk about her, it comes apart. I know, Hazel said. Do it anyway. He looked at her. That easy. Not easy, she said. Necessary. Those are different things. She took a sip of coffee. Start small. Tell them one thing at breakfast tomorrow. Not a speech. Just one thing. She liked the color yellow. She could whistle with 2 fingers. She laughed at things other people didn't find funny. Something true and small. Let it be a beginning. He absorbed this. The song she sang, he said. It was an old song her grandmother taught her. Scottish, I think. I don't know the name. She sang it every morning. Tell them that, Hazel said. Tomorrow. Tell them that. He nodded slowly. The silence between them was the good kind, now the kind that has earned itself. The lamp was low. Outside, the wind had picked up and was doing something thoughtful against the windows. Why are you doing this? Cole said. The same question he'd asked before, but different now. Not just about staying, about all of it. About Nell's question, and Margaret Sowers, and the letter to Messia, and the water rights, and all the evenings at this table, untangling the knots of a life that wasn't hers. Hazel thought about that. When I was young, she said, my mother used to say that the places that need the most tending are usually the places most worth tending. She looked at her cup. I thought she meant gardens. And now I think she meant everything. Cole looked at her across the lamp. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the tiredness, not the guilt, but something underneath both of them that had been there since she arrived, and that she was only now seeing clearly enough to name. It was hope. Damaged, uncertain, barely there. But present. She looked away first. "Go to bed," she said. "You've got the south pasture tomorrow, and I need you functional." He stood. He paused at the door. "Miss Carter," he said. She looked up. "I'm glad you didn't walk out that first day," he said. "I know you are," she said. He almost smiled closer than last time and went upstairs. She sat a while longer. On Saturday, something happened that reordered everything. She was in the kitchen with Samuel and Ruth when she heard Emma's voice from the front yard, the particular register of it high and alarmed that cut through walls without trying. She was at the door in seconds. Emma was in the yard, standing very still, facing 3 men on horses she didn't recognize, and the configuration of it. The men, the horses, the way they'd positioned themselves between Emma and the gate had the quality of something intentional. Not random. Not friendly. Hazel came off the porch. "Who are you?" she said to the man in front. Directly, not loud but clear. The man was somewhere in his 40s, lean in the way of people who are lean by design, rather than poverty, with the specific watchful stillness of someone who is deciding how much trouble to make and hasn't landed on a number yet. "Looking for Cole Mercer," he said. "He's not here. I'm managing the household. What do you need?" The man looked at her, the same looking past her look that Ned Harmon had tried, but with something colder behind it. "We're from the Brigg operation," he said. "Mr. Brigg wanted us to pass something along." "Pass it along then," Hazel said. He reached into his jacket. She made herself stay still. He pulled out a folded paper and held it out. She walked to the horse and took it and stepped back and read it without letting her face do anything. It was not a legal document. It was not official anything. It was a letter written in the careful handwriting of someone who'd had help with it, informing Cole Mercer that the water diversion from the South Creek was within the rights recently purchased from the Patton estate, and that any further attempt to contest those rights would be considered a declaration of hostile intent toward the Brigg operation. Hostile intent. She folded the paper. "Tell Mr. Brigg," she said, "that Cole Mercer has received his letter and will be responding through legal counsel." She held the man's gaze. "And tell him that next time he wants to send a message, he might consider not sending it to a household with children." She looked pointedly at Emma, who was still standing very still in the yard watching. The man looked at Emma too. Something shifted in his face, not guilt exactly, more like a recalculation. He turned his horse without another word. The other 2 followed. Hazel waited until they were past the gate. Then she crossed the yard to Emma and crouched down. "You all right?" she asked. Emma was looking at the gate where the dust from the horses was settling. "They were trying to scare someone," she said. "Yes," Hazel said. "Did it work?" "No," Hazel said. Emma turned and looked at her with those precise, assessing eyes. "Are you scared right now?" Hazel looked at this 5-year-old who asked the questions nobody else thought to ask. "A little," she said. Emma nodded, accepting this as reasonable. Then she took Hazel's hand and they walked back to the house together. Cole came back at noon, and Hazel handed him the letter across the kitchen table, and he read it, and she watched his jaw set in the way it set when he was angry and was managing the anger for the sake of context. "They sent men here," he said. "They did. While the children—" "Emma was in the yard," Hazel said. "She's fine. I handled it." He looked up from the letter. "You handled it," he said, something in his voice that wasn't quite a question. "I told them you'd be responding through legal counsel," Hazel said. "So you need to write a second letter to Messia today, more urgent than the first." He set the letter down on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "They're not going to stop," he said. "Brigg, he wants the water, and he's got money behind him, and connections in the county seat. This isn't going to be a letter and a response. This is going to be—" He stopped. "A fight," Hazel said. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Then we fight," she said. The word we had come out of her mouth before she'd examined it, and she saw Cole register it, that small flicker of something across his face there and gone. She didn't take it back. She sat down across from him and pulled the household ledger toward her and opened it to the accounts page. "Tell me exactly what the water rights situation costs you if it continues," she said. "Everything. What you lose, what you have to spend, what it takes to fight it legally. All of it." He looked at the ledger, then at her. "You sure you want to know all of it?" "I'm managing this household," she said. "I need to know everything that affects it." He sat down. He told her everything. By the time he finished, the afternoon was half gone, and the ledger had numbers in it that she hadn't had the day before, and the picture they made together was not comfortable, but it was clear, and Hazel had always preferred clarity to comfort, because at least clarity gave you something to work with. "All right," she said. "All right," Cole repeated, watching her. "2 letters to Mesilla today. One about the water rights. One requesting information on what legal options exist for protecting the existing claim. I'll write them if your hand isn't suited to it." She looked up. "Is it?" "I can write my own letters," he said with a dry quality that was the nearest thing she'd heard from him to actual humor. "Good," she said. "Then write them tonight after supper, and I'll help you go through what you need to include." She turned back to the ledger. "And tomorrow, Cole?" He looked at her when she used his first name. She hadn't done it before. She hadn't planned to do it now. She didn't correct herself. "Tomorrow," she said, steadying her voice into something matter-of-fact. "You need to talk to your neighbors. The ones who aren't Harmon and Sowers. The ones whose water might also be affected by what Brigg is doing upstream. Because a legal fight costs money, but a town that's paying attention to the same problem is something else entirely." He was quiet. "You've been managing this alone for 7 months," she said. "You need to stop doing that." Cole looked at her for a long time across the table, and the ledger, and the lamp, and all the accumulated weight of the last 10 days. And then he said quietly, and as directly as she'd ever heard him say anything, "So do you." She looked up. He held her gaze. "You came here alone with $32 and a letter full of lies," he said. "You've been managing a household that wasn't yours, and children that weren't yours, and a fight with Brigg that wasn't yours either, and you've been doing it like you don't need anything from anybody." He paused. "You don't have to do that here." The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at the ledger. She looked at her hands on it. She thought about her mother saying that the places that need the most tending are usually the places most worth tending. She thought about Emma's hand in hers on that first night. "I know," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "I mean it," Cole said. Not pressing, just present. The way she'd been asking him to be present with his children. "Whatever this is, whatever you're building here, you don't have to do it alone." She looked up at him. He looked back. Outside, the wind moved against the house the way it did in the evenings in Harlow Creek, steady, persistent, the kind of wind that didn't give up, the kind that had been crossing that territory for 1,000 years and intended to keep doing it. Inside, the lamp burned between them. And Hazel Carter, who had told herself every day for 10 days that she was not staying, who had been leaving in the abstract since the moment she'd set her bag back down on the floor of the front room, sat at the table, and felt something she had not felt since before her parents died, since before the house was sold, and the money was counted, and the employment office, and the letter, and the stagecoach, and all of it. She felt like she was somewhere she was supposed to be. She didn't say that. She was not ready to say that, and saying it would have changed something that was better left to grow in its own time. Instead, she said, "We'll need to contact at least 4 neighboring ranchers before the end of the week." Cole said, "I know which ones." She said, "Good." And they bent together over the ledger, his large, rough hand pointing to a line of numbers, her finger tracing the column above it. Their heads close enough in the lamplight that the shadow they made against the wall was a single shape, and neither of them mentioned that. The letters went to Mesilla on Sunday morning. Cole rode them to the post office himself, which Hazel had suggested, because a man who hands a letter to the postal agent directly is a man who means it, and she wanted Aldous Briggs people who were watching everything in this town. She was certain of that now, to see Cole Mercer riding into Harlow Creek with purpose instead of drifting in the way he'd been drifting for 7 months. James went with him. Cole had asked the night before, standing in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, and James had said yes, with a speed that told Hazel the yes had been waiting a long time to be asked for. She watched them ride out from the porch, James on the smaller roan beside his father on the gray, and Ruth came to stand beside her, and they watched together until the dust settled. "He asked James," Ruth said, not loudly, like she was noting something she'd stopped expecting. "He did," Hazel said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You told him to, didn't you?" "I told him to be present," Hazel said. "He worked out the rest himself." Ruth considered this with the careful evaluating expression she wore when she was deciding whether to believe something. Then she went back inside to help Nell with Samuel, and Hazel stood on the porch alone for another moment and looked at the direction Cole and James had gone, and thought about the water rights letter and what it was going to cost, and what the neighboring ranchers were going to say when Cole went to talk to them, and all the moving parts of a situation that had more moving parts than she'd bargained for. She had not slept well, not because of Samuel, who was recovering steadily and sleeping through more of the night now. Not because of the house, which was beginning incrementally to feel like a place that had been put back together by hands that knew what they were doing. She hadn't slept because of what Cole had said across the table. "You don't have to do it alone," and the way it had sat in her chest all night like something warm in a place that had been cold for a long time, and the way she didn't know what to do with warmth in that particular location. She went inside. There was work to do, and thinking while working was better than thinking while standing on porches, accomplishing nothing. The neighboring ranchers came on Tuesday. Cole had ridden out Monday to 4 properties. The Delwoods spread to the northeast, the Vasquez family who held the land directly west, old Clem Rafferty, whose cattle had been grazing the southern hills since before Cole was born, and a younger man named Price, who'd come up from Arizona 2 years ago and built a solid operation on the creek's eastern fork. He'd come back Monday evening tired and quieter than usual, and he'd sat at the table and told Hazel what each of them had said, and she'd listened and asked questions, and they'd talked it through until the lamp was low. Tuesday morning all 4 came. They arrived within 20 minutes of each other, which told Hazel they'd talked among themselves on the road, and they filled the front room with the particular atmosphere of men who are concerned, but haven't yet agreed on what to do about it. Cole stood at the fireplace. Hazel brought coffee, and then stood near the kitchen doorway, because she had decided that being in the room was important, but standing at the center of it was Cole's job, and she was not going to do it for him. She watched him. He was different than he'd been 2 weeks ago. Not transformed, that was not how people worked, and she had no patience for transformations that happened too fast to be real. But there was something in the way he stood, the way he looked at the men in his front room, that had more spine in it, more presence. Like a man who had been reminded slowly, and through practical necessity, that he had a self to bring to situations. "Briggs been diverting since March," Cole said. "I didn't put it together until last week, but the flow's down 1/3, and if it stays down through summer, it'll be down more than 1/3 by August," Price said. He was young, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who did his own accounting and trusted the numbers. "I've been watching the East Fork since April, thought it was seasonal. It's not seasonal. My grandfather used to say that creek," Rafferty said. He had the slow, deliberate delivery of a man who had been saying true things for 70 years and had learned there was no need to rush them. "Ran that water before any of us were born, before the Patton family was born. Water rights that go back that far don't transfer just because a piece of paper says they do. That's what we need to establish legally," Cole said. "Which is why I've written to Messia." "Briggs got a lawyer already," Vasquez said. He had a directness that Hazel appreciated, the kind that came from a man who had navigated enough difficulty to know that softening facts was a waste of time. "His man was in town last month talking to the county clerk." The room went slightly tighter. "Then we need ours faster," Hazel said from the doorway. Every head turned. She hadn't intended to speak, and she didn't apologize for it. A response from Messia could take 2 weeks, she said, which means we need documentation while we wait. Water flow measurements daily from each of your properties with dates, recorded properly. If this goes to a legal proceeding, those records are evidence. Without them, it's one man's word against another man's money. Rafferty looked at her with the expression of a man who is deciding whether to be offended or impressed and is landing on impressed. She's right, he said to Cole. I know, Cole said. He was looking at Hazel with that look, the one she'd been cataloging, the one that had more in it every time she saw it. Price pulled out a small notebook. I can start today. So can I, Vasquez said. By the time the men left an hour later, they had a plan. Not a certain plan, not a comfortable one, but a real one, the kind with specific actions and named people responsible for each of them. Cole walked them out. Hazel cleared the coffee cups and listened to the voices on the porch and the sound of horses moving off down the road. Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway. Did it work? It's a start, Hazel said. The fight isn't over. It's barely begun. But your father's not fighting it alone anymore. Ruth absorbed this. Then, Miss Hazel. Hazel turned. Ruth was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, and her face had the expression it wore when she was about to say something that had been accumulating for a while. I need to go back to school, she said. I haven't been going. Since November I've been staying home to manage things, and I know that was necessary, but She stopped, steadied herself. I want to go back. Hazel looked at her. How far behind are you? A term, Ruth said. Maybe a little more. Then you go Monday, Hazel said. I'll manage the house. That's what I'm here for. Ruth's jaw worked. James and Nell are already behind too. One thing at a time, Hazel said. You first. We'll get the others sorted after. Ruth nodded. Then she did something she hadn't done before she crossed the kitchen, and hugged Hazel quickly, fiercely, the way someone hugs a thing they're not sure they're allowed to want. And then she let go and left the kitchen before either of them had to acknowledge it. Hazel stood at the counter for a moment. She was not those children's mother. She told herself that again. But she put her hand briefly on the place on her arm where Ruth had held on, and then she went back to work. The twist came on Wednesday, and it came from a direction she had not planned for at all. She was at the kitchen table helping Emma practice her letters. Emma had decided that Hazel was the correct person to teach her to write a decision she had communicated not by asking, but simply by arriving at the table with a pencil and a piece of paper, and sitting down and looking expectant, when the front door opened and Cole came in from the yard. Not at the time she expected him, which was later, and with a quality of urgency in his footfall that brought her head up before she saw his face. His face, when she saw it, was the careful blank of someone managing something significant. I need to talk to you, he said. Alone. Emma looked at Hazel. Hazel looked at Emma. Go practice your E's at the other table, she said. I'll come check them in a few minutes. Emma went with the particular dignity of a 5-year-old who knows she is being trusted with something adult. Cole sat down across from Hazel. He had a letter in his hand. Not the Messia letter. The paper was different, older. The handwriting on the front of it, a woman's script that Hazel didn't recognize. This came in the Morning Post, he said. I picked it up in town. He set it on the table between them. Hazel looked at the handwriting, then at Cole. Who is it from? Catherine's sister, he said. Eleanor Marsh. She lives in Denver. He paused. We haven't spoken since the funeral. She and Catherine were there. Was a distance between them toward the end. I never fully understood it. After Catherine died, Eleanor sent a letter of condolence, and I wrote back, and that was... He stopped. That was the last I heard from her. Until now, Hazel said. Until now. He opened the letter and placed it flat on the table, but didn't push it toward her. She's coming, he said. She arrives in 2 weeks. Hazel waited. She says she's coming to see the children, Cole said. 2, she says she wants to assess the situation, make sure they're being properly cared for. He looked up. Those are her words. Assess the situation. That sounds like someone who's heard something concerning, Hazel said. Or someone who's been looking for a reason, Cole said. His voice was flat. Eleanor never, she and I didn't. He stopped, looked at the letter. She never thought I was the right man for Catherine. Said so at the wedding. We were civil after that because Catherine wanted us to be, but the civility was thin. Hazel sat with this for a moment. Does she have legal standing to do anything with the children? She's their aunt, Cole said. Blood relation. In a territory where a court has questions about the fitness of a household. He stopped. She becomes relevant, Hazel said. Yes. She looked at the letter on the table without touching it. This was what Ellis had warned her about before the talking turns into something more official. She had been working on assumption that the threat was the town, the gossip, the Sowers dinner table. She had not accounted for someone coming from outside the territory with a relationship to the children and a grievance toward their father. What did she and Catherine fight about? Hazel asked. The distance you mentioned. Cole was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Catherine wanted to stay, he said. Eleanor wanted her to come back east. When we found out Catherine was expecting again after the difficult time she'd had with Emma, Eleanor wrote to her and said she should come home to Denver. Have the baby there, around family, around doctors. He paused. Catherine stayed. She said this was her home, and these were her children, and she wasn't going to birth her baby in someone else's house. He stopped again. She was right. It was her choice to make. But it meant that when she died, Eleanor had warned her. In Eleanor's view of it, Catherine had chosen to stay, and it had cost her her life. And the person she chose to stay for... He looked at the table. Was me. Hazel said nothing for a moment. So Eleanor Marsh is coming here, she said finally, carrying grief and guilt and probably enough anger to do something with both of them, and she's going to walk into this house and look at these children, and look at you, and look at... She stopped. At you, Cole said. Yes. At a woman she's never met who is living in her dead sister's house managing her dead sister's children, Hazel said. Yes, Cole said. That. She stood up. She walked to the window and stood there for a moment with her back to him. All right, she said. All right, he said. She's coming in 2 weeks, Hazel said. That gives us 2 weeks. She turned. The house needs to be in the best order it's ever been. The children need to be in school, all of them, including Nell. I'll talk to her teacher. You need to be visibly present and managing the ranch. And... She paused. You need to decide what you're going to say to her. What I'm going to say. About Catherine, Hazel said. About what happened. About the 7 months that followed. She held his gaze. You told me once that Catherine lost more than you knew how to account for. If Eleanor Marsh is coming here looking for evidence that you failed your wife and your children, you are going to have to be the one who gives her the truth instead of the evidence. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long time. I don't know, he said. That's the first honest answer you've given me about something hard, she said. Good. Practice giving those because you're going to need to give a lot of them in the next 2 weeks. He looked at her with something in his face that was complicated and new, and she didn't have the time right now to examine what it was. Start tonight, she said. At supper, tell the children about their aunt. Give them 2 weeks to get used to the idea before she arrives. He nodded. And Cole, she said. He looked up. Don't be afraid of her, she said. She lost her sister. That grief is real and you need to respect it. But her grief doesn't give her the right to walk into your house and take your children. She might try, he said. Let her try, Hazel said. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face. All right, he said quietly. He told the children at supper that night. Hazel watched from the stove, keeping her hands busy with the dishes, listening. Ruth went very still when Cole said Eleanor's name. Aunt Ellie, she said, quietly. Yes, Cole said. She's coming here. In 2 weeks. Ruth looked at her plate. I remember her, she said. She came once when I was 8. She and Mama—" She stopped. "They loved each other," Cole said, "even when they disagreed." James looked at his father with an expression that was working something out. "Is she coming to take us?" he asked. There it was. Straight to the point as always with James. Cole held his son's gaze. "No," he said. "She's coming to see you, to know you're all right." "Are we?" James said, not combatively, genuinely. Cole looked around the table. Ruth, James, Nell, Emma, Samuel in his basket. Hazel at the stove. He looked at all of it. "Yes," he said, and the word had the weight of something a man has decided rather than something he's performing. "We are." Emma put her hand flat on the table the way she did when she was confirming something. Nell said, "Does she look like Mama?" Cole's face did something quiet and private. "She's taller," he said, "and she talks faster, but yes, around the eyes." Nell nodded and looked at her plate and didn't say anything more, but her hand found Emma's under the table, which Hazel saw and noted, and filed away in the place she kept things that mattered. The next 12 days moved at the speed of everything at once. Ruth started school on Monday. She came home the first day with her jaw set in the way it set when something had been harder than expected, and she wasn't going to say so unless asked. And Hazel asked, and Ruth said the other students had been complicated. Some kind, some not. Danny Sowers had looked at her in a way she described as like he was waiting for me to be embarrassed, and she had sat at her desk and been unequivocally not embarrassed, and the teacher had asked her to stay after, and told her she was behind, but not unfixably so, and there was extra work to do. "I'll help you with it," Hazel said. "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," Hazel said. "Sit down and show me what you have." Ruth sat down. She showed her what she had. They worked at the kitchen table every evening for an hour after supper. The two of them and Samuel played on the floor between them, and occasionally contributed his opinion on long division, which was mostly that it was beneath his attention. On the fourth evening, James materialized beside them, and looked at the arithmetic, and said he had some of the same problems from last year, and could he and Hazel move the lamp to the center of the table, and James sat down, and they worked together, the three of them, and Hazel thought, this is what a kitchen table is for. Nell's teacher sent a note home after Hazel enrolled her. The note said in the careful language of someone with professional obligations that Nell had been observed to be emotionally withdrawn and prone to extended silences, and the school was prepared to accommodate her needs, but wanted the family to be aware. Hazel read the note, wrote a response that said Nell had experienced significant loss, and was recovering, that she had a support structure at home, and an interest in drawing that her teacher might consider channeling, and sent it back. Nell's teacher, whose name was Miss Alcott, sent a reply that said she had given Nell a clean sketchbook. On Thursday of the second week, Nell came home and went directly to the kitchen and showed Hazel the sketchbook. She had filled 3 pages. In the first one, she had drawn the kitchen, not the room itself, but the feeling of the kitchen, which was different and harder to do, and she had done it the lamp and the table and the figures sitting around it, overlapping and close. "Miss Alcott says I have a gift," Nell said, without pride, just reporting. "Miss Alcott's right," Hazel said. Nell looked at the drawing, then she looked at Hazel. "Can I draw you," she asked, "properly, with you sitting still?" "When I have a still moment," Hazel said. "Which may be sometime next year." Nell almost laughed. It was the first time. It was small, and she covered it with her hand, as though it had escaped without permission, but it was there, and it was real, and Hazel felt it, like something unlocking. The water rights response from Mesilla came on Friday, 10 days after Cole had sent the letter, which was faster than she'd hoped, and slower than she'd needed. It was from a lawyer named Castillo, who said the situation was workable, but complex, who asked for the documentation the neighbors had been gathering, and who said he would need to travel to Harlow Creek to examine the physical evidence before proceeding. He quoted a fee that made Cole go quiet for a long moment. Cole told Hazel the number across the kitchen table. She looked at the household ledger. She looked at the ranch accounts. She did the arithmetic twice, and then she looked at him. "You can cover it," she said, "barely, if the summer cattle sales hold." "If?" he said. "Yes," she said. "If." She closed the ledger. "Write back to Castillo. Tell him to come. And if it doesn't work out, if the water's already damaged this summer's—" "Cole," she said. He stopped. "Write the letter," she said. "One thing at a time." He looked at her across the table. There was something exhausted and grateful in it that, the look of a man who has been making every decision alone for so long that being told what the next step is lands like rest. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked up sharply. He was almost smiling. She looked back at the ledger. Eleanor Marsh arrived on a Wednesday. Hazel had told herself she would not be nervous, and she was not nervous, and the fact that she reorganized the kitchen shelves twice on Tuesday evening was entirely unrelated to Eleanor Marsh. She heard the wagon from the yard. Hazel had stayed inside deliberately because she thought Cole should be the one on the porch when his sister-in-law arrived and the children should be with him, and she listened to the sounds of arrival, the horse being settled, voices on the porch, the children's greetings. Then the door opened. Eleanor Marsh came into the front room first because Eleanor Marsh was that kind of person. She was, as Cole had said, taller than Catherine, taller than Hazel by several inches, with dark hair that had gone partially gray, in a way she'd clearly made a decision about, and the bearing of a woman who had decided somewhere along the way that she did not have time for posturing. She wore good traveling clothes, dusty from the road, and she looked around the front room with eyes that were— Hazel registered it immediately. Not hostile, but assessing. Not looking for reasons to condemn, looking for truth, or that was different. That was something she could work with. Eleanor's eyes landed on Hazel. "You must be Miss Carter," she said. "I am," Hazel said. "You must be Miss Carter," she said. Nothing about it was manageable. "Is there coffee?" "There is," Hazel said. "Then we're off to a reasonable start," Eleanor said, and went to the kitchen table and sat down. Hazel poured. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at Hazel across it with those assessing eyes. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 3 weeks, Hazel said. "And before you 3 women who left?" It wasn't a question. "I heard about them." "From who?" Hazel asked. "Margaret Sowers writes long letters," Eleanor said dryly. "She wrote to me after the second one left, said she was worried about the children." Hazel looked at her steadily. "Margaret Sowers's concern for the children is genuine," she said. "Her information is sometimes incomplete." "Is it incomplete now?" "Come see," Hazel said. She stood up. "The children are in the yard with their father. Come see them." Eleanor looked at her for a moment. Then she stood and followed. The yard was loud in the way yards are loud when children have been given permission to be outside without supervision. James running the roan in a circle demonstrating something to his father about the horse's gait. Nell sitting on the fence watching with her sketchbook. Emma directing some private operation involving sticks and an arrangement of rocks that had its own internal logic. Samuel on Cole's hip, regarding the world with the alert satisfaction of a baby who has learned that the world, when attended to properly, is reasonably interesting. Eleanor stopped. She looked at all of it. She looked for a long time. Ruth came out of the barn and saw her aunt and stopped. And something happened in Ruth's face that was complicated grief and memory, and the particular complicated love of someone who reminds you of someone else. And Eleanor opened her arms, and Ruth walked into them with the careful dignity of a 12-year-old who is trying not to cry and is not succeeding. And Eleanor held her and looked over Ruth's head at the yard with eyes that were doing their own not succeeding. Cole looked at Eleanor across the yard. Eleanor looked back. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was 2 people who had been blaming each other for a loss that neither of them caused, looking at each other across the yard, where the children who were the evidence of what they'd both lost were running and drawing and living. Hazel went back inside. She was not part of that moment, and she knew it. She went back to the kitchen and started on supper and gave them the yard and the grief and each other. Supper that evening was the most complicated meal Hazel had cooked since she'd arrived. Not in the physical sense she'd been managing the Mercer table for 3 weeks and had gotten the rhythm of it well enough to do it without thinking, but in the atmospheric sense, because Eleanor Marsh at the table changed the weight of everything. She talked to the children, really talked. Asking Ruth about school, asking James about the roan, asking Nell about the sketchbook, which Nell, wordlessly but without hesitation, brought to the table and turned to the kitchen drawing, and Eleanor looked at it for a long time and said, "Your mother drew quietly," and Nell looked up and said, "Did she?" in a voice that was barely there, and Eleanor said, "She did, yes. She drew flowers mostly. She wasn't as precise as this." Nell looked at her drawing. Then she looked at Eleanor. "Will you tell me things?" she said. "About her, things I might be forgetting." Eleanor's face did something careful and painful. "Yes," she said, "I will." Cole sat at the end of the table and ate and watched and said very little, which was sometimes his way when he was absorbing something at depth. Hazel sat across from Emma and refilled things that needed refilling and listened to it all. After the children were in bed, the three of them sat at the kitchen table. Hazel had started to leave, and Eleanor had said, "Please stay," with a directness that didn't leave much room for polite refusal. Cole had his coffee. Eleanor had hers. Hazel had water. Eleanor looked at the table for a moment, and then looked up at Cole and said, "I owe you an apology." The kitchen went very still. Cole looked at his sister-in-law. "I blamed you," Eleanor said. Her voice was controlled, but not closed, the voice of someone who has been rehearsing something and is saying the real version, not the rehearsed one. "For staying. For letting her stay. I told myself that if you'd been the right kind of man, you would have insisted she come to Denver, been near doctors, been—" She stopped. "It wasn't fair. It was grief and it was guilt. I wasn't there, and she didn't come when I asked her to, and I needed to put the fault somewhere outside myself. You were available." Cole was looking at the table. "She wanted to stay," Eleanor said. "I know that. I knew it then. Catherine never did anything she didn't want to do. You know that better than I do." She paused. "I think what I was really angry about was that she wanted you more than she wanted to be safe. And that felt like—" She stopped. "It felt like you had more of her than I did. Even at the end." Cole looked up. His jaw was working in the way it worked when emotion was moving through it faster than he could manage. "She talked about you," he said, "all the time. She wrote to you every month." "I know," Eleanor said. "I didn't always write back as often." A silence. "She would have hated this," Cole said, quietly. "All of it. The house going wrong and the children. She would have been absolutely furious with me." "Yes," Eleanor said. "She would have, and then she would have fixed it." She paused. "She was better at fixing things than either of us." Something shifted in the room. Not solved, not as simple as solved, but shifted the way a stuck door shifts when someone finally leans on it with the right weight. Hazel looked at the table and felt with some force that she was witnessing something that needed to happen without her managing it. So she didn't manage it. She sat quietly and let them find the shape of it together. It was Eleanor who turned to her eventually. "Margaret Sowers told me 3 housekeepers had left," she said. "She wrote that she expected you'd leave too. She said the situation was impossible." "She changed her view of that somewhat," Hazel said. "We had a conversation." Eleanor looked at her. "What changed your mind about staying?" "Emma," Hazel said. "Emma took my hand on the first night." Eleanor looked at the doorway through which the upstairs sounds of settling children had quieted to nothing. "She's like Catherine was," Eleanor said. "Catherine had that quality of deciding something and then just doing it. No second guessing. Absolute." She paused. "She would have liked you, I think. Catherine. She always had time for women who said things plainly." "I'll take that," Hazel said. Eleanor looked at her for a moment, then at Cole, then back at Hazel, and her eyes did the thing eyes do when they're working something out that they're not ready to say yet. She let it go without saying it. "I'm staying 2 weeks," Eleanor said. "If that's all right." "The children will want more," Hazel said. "But 2 weeks is a good start." Eleanor nodded. She stood. She looked at Cole. "Tomorrow," she said. "I want to hear everything. About the water rights and the lawyer and what you need." Cole looked at his sister-in-law. You came to assess the situation, he said. I came to do whatever the situation needs, Eleanor said. Those are different things. She looked at Hazel once more, measuring private, and went upstairs. Cole and Hazel sat at the table. She's going to be all right, Hazel said. She and Catherine used to fight like... He stopped. They were the same person in different directions. Both of them sure they were right. Neither of them willing to let a thing go. Good quality in a person you want fighting for your water rights, Hazel said. He looked at her. She mentioned her husband, Hazel said. At supper. In passing. He's a banker. In Denver. She held Cole's gaze. A banker who knows lawyers. He stared at her. You're saying... I'm saying, Hazel said carefully, that if Eleanor Marsh comes here and sees that these children are well, and this household is running, and their father is present, and the ranch is being fought for, she might find herself with more motivation to help than she arrived with. She paused. People who come looking for failure and find effort have to decide what to do with that. Eleanor seems like someone who decides in the direction of action. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that look. You think about everything, he said. Someone has to, she said. You could... He stopped. She looked at him. You could have been anywhere, he said. Done anything. You're the way you handle things the way you think. You could have been anywhere. I'm here, she said. I know, he said. I know you are. That's... He stopped again. He had a habit of stopping in the middle of sentences when the end of them got too close to something true. She'd noticed it from the beginning, and she'd been patient with it, and she was still patient with it now. But tonight, with Eleanor's voice still in the room, and the lamp low, and 3 weeks of everything between them, she was less patient than usual. Cole, she said. He looked at her. Finish the sentence, she said. He looked at the table, looked at his hands, looked at her. I'm grateful, he said. That's not the whole of it, but I don't have the right to say the whole of it yet. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. Not yet. But sometime, he said. It was not quite a question. She stood. She put her hands on the table and looked at the lamp and then at him. Fix the water rights first, she said. His breath came out like a man who has been holding something and has been given permission to set it down carefully rather than drop it. Yes, ma'am, he said with the slight quality he put on that phrase sometimes now. Not deference, something closer to its opposite. Something that was almost the beginning of something she didn't have a word for yet. She took the lamp to the stairs. She paused. Cole, she said. Yeah. The song Catherine sang, she said. The Scottish one. He was quiet. Find out the name, she said. Nell asked me last week if I knew it. She wants to learn it. She heard him exhale. I'll find it, he said. She went upstairs. She checked on Samuel, sleeping warm, the right kind of warm, and on Nell and Emma, who were tangled together in Nell's bed in the way they'd taken to sleeping since Eleanor's visit had been announced, finding comfort in proximity. She stood in each doorway for a moment. Then she went to her own room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about the $32 she'd had when she arrived. She thought about the letter that had said orderly. She thought about every choice that had led her to this room in this house in Harlow Creek, New Mexico territory, with a water rights fight and a visiting aunt and 5 children she had absolutely no legal relationship to, and a man downstairs who couldn't finish sentences. She thought, I am not leaving. She had not decided this. She had simply arrived at it the way you arrive at the end of a road, not because you chose to end it, but because you walked it all the way to where it goes. She lay down. Outside, the New Mexico night was doing what it always did, enormous dark full of wind and the sounds of animals and the deep breathing of land that had been here longer than anyone's problems and would outlast them all. Inside the house settled around her. Hers. She didn't say it out loud, but she let herself think it clearly once. Then she closed her eyes. Eleanor Marsh had been in Harlow Creek for 4 days when she sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to her husband in Denver. Hazel saw her writing it. She didn't ask about it. She had learned over the weeks of managing this household that there were things best left to develop without being observed too directly, the way bread rises better when you stop opening the oven to check on it. But Eleanor told her anyway. She sealed the envelope, looked up, and said, "I've asked William to contact a colleague in Mesilla, a man who specializes in territorial land and water rights. He's better than whoever Castillo is." Hazel set down the pot she was holding. "He owes William a favor," Eleanor continued with the crisp, practical tone of someone who has decided on a course and is reporting it rather than proposing it. "It won't cost Cole what Castillo quoted, and he wins cases." "Why?" Hazel asked. Eleanor looked at her. "Why am I doing this?" "Yes." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "Because I came here expecting to find 5 children being neglected by a man who had given up," she said. "And instead I found 5 children who are eating regularly and going to school and have someone braiding their hair on Wednesday mornings." She paused. "And a man who is trying. Imperfectly, but trying." Another pause. "Catherine chose this family. I should have trusted that choice a long time ago." She picked up the envelope and left to post it. Hazel stood in the kitchen alone for a moment. Then she went back to work, because there was always work, and because work was what she did when she felt things too large to stand still with. The letter to Denver changed the water rights fight faster than anything else could have. Castillo was replaced within the week by a lawyer named Hargrove, compact, efficient, with the specific confidence of a man who has won enough of these to know which details matter. He came to Harlow Creek on a Thursday, examined the water flow documentation the neighbors had been gathering, rode the creek line himself, and sat at Cole's kitchen table and said flatly and without decoration, "Briggs' claim is overextended. He purchased rights to the patent water, but the patent water never extended to the main creek line. He's been diverting water that was never his to divert." Cole sat very still across from him. "Can you prove that?" "With the records from the county seat and the documentation your neighbors have provided, yes," Hargrove said. "It will take time, 3 months, possibly 4, but yes." "And in the meantime?" Hazel asked from her end of the table. Hargrove looked at her. He'd taken her measure when he arrived and had been treating her as a party to the conversation ever since, which she appreciated without drawing attention to. "In the meantime, I'll file for a temporary injunction against further diversion. It won't be guaranteed, but it'll put Brigg on notice that this is no longer informal. Men like Brigg." He paused. "They push until they hit something that pushes back. We're going to push back." Cole nodded, slowly, with the nod of a man who has spent months being pushed and has only recently remembered that he has weight of his own. Hazel looked at Cole across the table. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Eleanor left on a Saturday morning, 12 days after she'd arrived, with the children clustered around the wagon in a way that made the leaving feel significantly more complicated than Eleanor's composed expression was letting on. Nell had given her a drawing, the kitchen table, all 7 of them around it, careful and precise and exactly right. Eleanor had looked at it for a long time and then folded it into her traveling bag with a care that said everything. Ruth hugged her for a long time. James shook her hand with a solemnity that made Eleanor almost smile. Emma told her she was welcome to come back. Eleanor, who had arrived in Harlow Creek with the bearing of someone ready to find fault, left with the bearing of someone who has had something clarified that had been wrong in her for a long time. At the wagon, she turned to Hazel. "You're good for them," Eleanor said, directly, the way Eleanor said most things. "They're good for each other," Hazel said. "I'm just keeping the schedule." Eleanor looked at her with those eyes that saw more than she commented on. "Don't underestimate what you are here," she said. Catherine would have said, she stopped. Then she would have said it takes a particular kind of woman to walk into someone else's life and make it better without making it hers. And she would have meant that as the highest compliment she knew how to give. Hazel looked at the wagon wheels. "Safe travels, Mrs. Marsh," she said. "Eleanor," she said. We're past Mrs. Marsh." She drove away. The yard was quiet when the wagon disappeared. Emma slipped her hand into Hazel's. Hazel held it. The injunction came through in 2 weeks. Hazel was in the kitchen when Cole came back from town with the paper in his hand and his face doing something that was not quite the expression of a man who had won something, but was the expression of a man who had remembered that winning was possible. He put the paper on the table, and she read it, and he stood there while she read it. "Briggs been ordered to halt the diversion pending the full hearing," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "That means the creek comes back," she said, "before summer's end." "If the order holds," he said, "Brigg will challenge it." "Let him challenge it," Hazel said. "Hargrove said he can defend it." Cole sat down across from her. He looked at the paper, then at her. "3 months ago," he said, "I was losing water and losing function, and I'd had 3 women leave this house, and I wrote a letter that said things that weren't true because I didn't know how else to ask for what I needed." He looked at the table. "And then you came in the door with your bag, and you said nothing," Hazel said, "for approximately the first 4 hours. "I said come in," he said. "Generously," she agreed. He looked up, and he was almost smiling, closer than the times before. Closer than he'd been to it since Catherine died, she suspected, though she hadn't known him then, and could only measure from the man she'd walked in to find. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I've been—" He stopped. He had that quality he got when a sentence was heading toward something true, and the habit of stopping was fighting with the will to finish. "You told me once to finish sentences," he said. "I did," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this since about the 2nd week," he said. "And I keep not saying it because—" He stopped again, looked at the table, looked up. "Because you've been here doing everything that needs doing, and I didn't want you to think I wasn't trying to—" He stopped. "Cole," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm getting there." She waited. "You walked in here and you stayed," he said, "when you had every reason to go. You stayed and you fixed the kitchen and you got Samuel to the doctor and you braided the girl's hair and you went to Margaret Sowers and stared down Ned Harmon and handled Briggs' men in the yard, and you sat at this table with me every night and helped me figure out how to be the father my children needed." He stopped. He wasn't looking at the table anymore. He was looking at her. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, it stopped being about gratitude. And I don't know exactly when that happened, but I know it happened, and I think you probably know it too. The kitchen was very quiet. "I know it," she said. He looked at her. I don't have the right words for it," he said. "Catherine I knew how to love her from when we were young. I knew her before I had to learn her. He stopped. "You're someone I had to learn. And I'm not finished learning you. But what I've learned—" He stopped one more time. Then, like a man who has finally decided that the end of the plank is going to hold his weight, "I don't want you to be the housekeeper anymore." She looked at him. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because the house needs it, not because the children— the children need it, and I know that, but that's not—" He put his hands flat on the table. "I want you to stay because when you're not in the room, I notice it. And when you are in the room, He stopped, made himself go on. "I breathe different. That's the only way I know how to say it. I breathe different when you're here." She sat with that. She sat with the water rights paper between them, and the lamp burning, and the sounds of children upstairs. She could hear James explaining something to Nell, their voices through the ceiling. The ordinary miracle of children in a house that had learned to be alive again. "I told myself every day for the first 3 weeks that I wasn't staying," she said. "That this was a position. That I had $32 and a set of skills, and this was just where I was applying them temporarily." "I know," he said. "I could see you deciding to leave every morning and then not leaving." "Emma didn't help," Hazel said. "Emma has a gift," Cole said with a feeling in it. "She does." She looked at her hands on the table. I haven't had a place that was mine in a long time." Not since my parents died. I've been in other people's houses doing other people's work, making other people's households run. I got good at it because I had to. But it's... She stopped. Found the word. It's lonely. Being good at taking care of things that don't belong to you. He looked at her. They belong to you, he said. The children, Hazel. They are yours, as much as anything can be. It was the first time he'd used her name. She felt it land. That's not something you can just say, she said. I know, he said, which is why I'm not just saying it. I'm asking. He held her gaze. Stay here. Not as the housekeeper. Stay here as... He stopped. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He didn't stop. He went through the stop. Marry me, he said. Not because the house needs a woman in it. Not because the children need a mother, though they do, and you know they do. Because I need... He took a breath. Because I need you specifically. Hazel Carter specifically. Who says things plainly and doesn't let me get away with half sentences, and went to Margaret Sowers alone and held Samuel through his fever and braids. Nell's hair on Wednesday mornings, and sat at this table with me every night and helped me find my way back. He paused. I need you. That's what I'm saying, as plain as I know how to say it. She looked at him across the table. She thought about the employment office in Santa Fe, the letter that said orderly, the 4 days on the stagecoach eating dried biscuit. The moment she'd put her hand on the door handle and Emma had come down the stairs. She thought about her mother saying the places that need the most tending are the places most worth tending. She thought about what Eleanor had said. It takes a particular kind of woman to walk into someone else's life and make it better without making it hers. She thought, but what if she makes it hers? Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes. I'm not going to perform uncertainty about it, Cole. I've been deciding this for 5 weeks. Yes. Something happened in his face that she had not seen there before. It moved through him fast and total the way dawn moves, not gradual, just suddenly present where it hadn't been. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers, and she turned her hand over and held his. And they stayed like that for a moment, with the lamp burning between them and the paper and all the weeks of everything behind them. Just like that, he said. You asked plainly, she said. You get a plain answer. He almost laughed. She felt it through his hand. That almost laugh that had been there since the beginning. The one that kept almost happening, and this time it did happen. Quiet and real. And she thought, there it is. There is the man underneath the grief. Then Emma's voice came through the ceiling in that carrying way it had, telling James something was unfair with complete conviction, and James's voice responded, and Nels Cole looked at the ceiling. She's going to be so satisfied about this, he said. Emma. She'll claim credit, Hazel said. She'll be right to. He looked at her with those eyes she'd been learning for 5 weeks. How did you do that? What? Make this. He gestured at the ceiling, at the voices at the table, and the lamp and all of it. Make this a house again. It was already a house, she said. It just needed someone to remind it of the fact. He held her hand and looked at her, and she let him look because she had nothing to hide from it, and nowhere else she intended to be. The next morning, Hazel did not tell the children. She let Cole do it. She stayed in the kitchen and listened through the door, which she considered fair. She had given him every hard thing she could think of to give him over the last 5 weeks. And this was a thing he needed to do himself, and besides, she wanted to hear it without being watched hearing it. He told them at breakfast. She heard the table go quiet, the way it went quiet when something important was happening. Then Emma's voice. I knew it. Ruth. Papa. James. Nothing for a long moment, and then, she's not going anywhere. Cole. No, she's not going anywhere. Another silence. Longer. Then Nell, in the almost not their voice that Hazel had learned, meant the largest feelings. Does that mean she's ours? And Cole, if she'll have us. And Emma, conclusive, satisfied, in the tone of someone confirming a calculation she'd run on the first night. She will. She already does. Hazel stood at the stove with her hand over her mouth and breathed. She was not crying. She was specifically not crying. She was, however, standing very still for a moment that she was not going to apologize for. Then Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there for a second, this 12-year-old girl who had carried so much for so long, who had fed siblings and braided hair and managed meals and stood at the foot of stairs watching adults leave, who had been running on duty when she should have been running on childhood, who had hugged Hazel that one fierce quick time and then gone back to being responsible because she didn't know how else to be. She looked at Hazel. "You're staying," she said. "I'm staying," Hazel said. Ruth crossed the kitchen in 5 steps and hugged her. Not the quick, fierce hug from before, but a long one. Both arms, the kind that says, "I am not letting go until I am ready." And Ruth was not ready for a while, and Hazel stood there and held her and let the length of it be whatever it needed to be. When Ruth finally stepped back, her eyes were wet, but she did not acknowledge that, and Hazel did not acknowledge that, and they both looked at the stove together. "Breakfast is going to burn," Ruth said. "It is," Hazel agreed. Ruth picked up the spoon and stirred the pot, and Hazel stood beside her, and they worked together. And Hazel thought this. This is the one. Not the roof, not leaking, not the water rights resolved, not the house clean, or the accounts balanced, or the fight with Brig finished. This. A girl who had been carrying everything alone, standing at a stove, stirring a pot with someone beside her who was not leaving. James came to find Hazel after breakfast. He came to the back of the house where she was taking in washing, and he stood nearby with his hands in his pockets in the manner of a 9-year-old who has something to say and is deciding how to say it without losing dignity in the process. She waited. "Miss..." He stopped, started again. "What do we call you?" he asked. "After." She looked at him. "What do you want to call me?" He thought about it with genuine seriousness. "Not Miss Carter anymore," he said. "You're not the housekeeper anymore, so that doesn't..." He frowned. "But I'm not going to call you Mama. That's not..." "It's not," she said. "And I wouldn't ask you to." He nodded, relieved. "So what then?" She looked at the washing, thought about it genuinely as it deserved to be thought about. "What if you just called me Hazel?" she said. "When you're ready. There's no rush." James turned this over. "That's simple," he said. "Yeah, I can do that." "Good," she said. She handed him the end of a sheet. "Hold this." He took it. They folded together without further conversation, and it was one of the best conversations Hazel had had in 5 weeks. Nell's response came in the form of a drawing which Hazel found slipped under her bedroom door that evening. It was a picture of the whole family at the kitchen table, all 7 of them, and Hazel at the center, not at the edge where a housekeeper might sit, but at the center, the lamp above her, and everyone else arranged around her, the way planets arrange around the thing with the most gravity. At the bottom, in Nell's careful child's handwriting, "This is us." Hazel held the drawing for a long time. Then she pinned it to the wall above her bureau, right there where she would see it every morning when she woke up. The weeks that followed moved with a different quality than the weeks before. Not easier. Exactly, the water rights fight was ongoing, and the ranch had months of deferred maintenance to address, and 5 children were still 5 children, which meant that no morning was predictable and no supper was quiet for long. But different in the way that things are different when the fundamental question has been answered. The work was the same work. The days were the same days. But the ground under them had shifted from something temporary to something that intended to remain. Hargrove filed the primary case in the 3rd week of August and sent word that the hearing was scheduled for October. Briggs' lawyer filed a counter-challenge, and Hargrove responded to the counter-challenge, and Hazel read every document that came to the house and asked questions about everything she didn't understand. And Cole answered them, and between the two of them, they understood the situation better than anyone except Hargrove himself. Price came by one evening and brought Vasquez with him, and the 3 men sat at the table and went through the documentation, and Hazel refilled coffee and put food on the table and listened. Rafferty sent word that 2 more ranchers in the eastern section had experienced reduced flow and wanted to add their records to the case. "It's bigger than Brigg realized," Cole said after Price and Vasquez had gone. "He thought he was diverting from one man's land. He's been diverting from 6. Makes the case harder for him and easier for you," Hazel said. Hargrove said the same thing. "Hargrove's right." Cole looked at her across the table in the lamplight that had become so familiar by now that she could read his expressions in it like text. He was thinking something. "Say it," she said. "I keep thinking about what this looked like in June," he said, "before you came." "Don't," she said. I'm not beating myself up about it," he said. I'm aware of the distance between what it was and what it is. And I'm trying to understand how much of that is you, and how much of it is—" "All of it happened because you let it," Hazel said. "I didn't rebuild anything Cole hadn't built first. I just came in and reminded you it was there." He looked at her. "That's generous." "It's true," she said. "Don't give me credit for your house. I'd like to give you credit for something," he said with a quality in it that made her look up. He was looking at her with the eyes she'd been learning the real ones, the ones behind the tired ones, the ones that had been getting less buried every week. "Give me credit for the braids," she said. "I do excellent braids." He smiled, all the way, for the first time since she'd arrived. She had to look at the ledger for a moment, because it hit her harder than she was prepared for that smile complete and present the face of the man who had been underneath the grief for 7 months, finally showing up to claim the space. "Cole," she said without looking up. "Yeah." "You should smile more," she said. "Your children need to see it." "They're seeing it," he said. "More than they were." "More than they were isn't enough," she said. "Those children have had 7 months of their father's grief. They deserve years of his—" She stopped, found the word. "His presence, the whole of it." He was quiet. "Emma told me last week," Hazel said, "that Papa laughed at something James said at supper. She told me like it was news, like she was reporting a rare event." She looked up. "It shouldn't be rare. Make it ordinary." He held her gaze. "Working on it," he said, quietly, meaning it. "Good," she said. The hard twist came in September, which was the one she hadn't seen coming. Not Brigg, not the water rights, not anything from outside. It came from Ruth. Ruth, who had been going to school every day and catching up with steady determination and sitting at the kitchen table with Hazel every evening working through the extra lessons. Ruth, who had stopped carrying the household on her 12-year-old shoulders and had been incrementally becoming 12 years old again, in a way that was quiet and real, and one of the things Hazel was most proud of in the whole work of the last months. She came home from school on a Wednesday with her face arranged in the careful expressionless mask that meant something significant was happening underneath it, and she sat down at the kitchen table and she said without preamble, "Miss Alcott says I should be in the 8th grade, not the 6th. Hazel set down what she was holding. "She said that. She says I've been working at that level since I came back. She says 2 terms of running the household." Ruth stopped. "She says it counts. The mathematics and the reading and the managing. She says I should be placed where I actually am, not where I was when I stopped attending." Hazel looked at her. Ruth was holding herself very still in the way she did when she was waiting to see how an adult was going to respond to something, before she allowed herself to respond to it. "That's—" Hazel started, stopped, made sure her voice was right. "Ruth, that is excellent news." Ruth's face cracked, just slightly. The careful mask moved. "It doesn't feel, it's 2 whole grades, and I'll be in class with people older than me, and I don't—" She stopped. "I don't know if I can do it." "You've been doing it?" Hazel said. "You've been doing 8th grade work every evening at this table for 2 months. The grade is just catching up to where you already are." Ruth looked at the table. "You ran this household for 7 months," Hazel said. "At 12 years old. You fed 4 children and an infant on whatever was available, and you kept things together when the adult in this house couldn't. That is not something a 6th grader does." She paused. Let the grade catch up to who you are, Ruth. You've earned it. Ruth was quiet. Then, will you still help me in the evenings? Every evening, Hazel said, for as long as you need it. Ruth nodded. She looked at the table for another moment. Then she looked up and her face was doing something new, not the careful, expressionless mask, not the brittle competence, but something younger and more uncertain and more real. I've been angry, Ruth said, quietly. Since November. At Papa. I didn't let myself be angry at Mama because that seemed wrong. But I've been angry. At all of it. Hazel sat down across from her. That's, she said carefully, that's the most honest thing you've said to me. I know. Ruth looked at her hands. Is it wrong to be angry at your mother for dying? No, Hazel said without hesitation. No, it's not wrong. It's one of the most human things there is. You were 12 years old and she was gone, and you had to become the adult, and you didn't get to be furious about it because there was too much to do. She held Ruth's gaze. The anger isn't about love. You can be furious at someone you love, absolutely. Both things are true at once. Ruth's eyes were wet. She blinked once hard. I miss her every single day, she said. And sometimes I'm so angry at her that I can't. She stopped. I know, Hazel said. How do you didn't know her? No, Hazel said. But I know what it is to love someone and lose them and be angry about it and have nowhere to put the anger. I buried both my parents inside a year. I was angry for a long time. Ruth looked at her. What did you do with it? I got on a stagecoach, Hazel said, and came to the first place that asked for me. Ruth made a sound that was almost a laugh and was something more complicated than a laugh. Ruth, Hazel said, talk to your father about this. The anger and the missing and all of it. He's carrying the same things. You're both walking around trying not to hurt the other one, and it's keeping you at a distance from each other. Ruth looked at the table. I don't know how to start. Tell him what you told me, Hazel said. Start there. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Will you be here? She asked. When I do it? No, Hazel said. That one you do by yourselves, but I'll be right in the next room. Ruth nodded. She talked to Cole that evening after supper, and Hazel was in the kitchen, and she could hear them through the door. Not the words, just the voices. Cole's low and Ruth's higher, and at one point Cole's voice did something that went very quiet, and Ruth's voice did something that was clearly crying. Not the controlled kind, the real kind. And there was a long silence, and then more voices, and then more silence. Hazel washed every dish in the kitchen, and reorganized the flower shelf, and did not open the door. When Ruth came to the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, her eyes were red and her face was the most open it had been since Hazel arrived. Okay, she said. Okay, Hazel said. Ruth went upstairs. Cole appeared a minute later. He looked at Hazel with the face of a man who has just been through something necessary and hard and real. His jaw was still working. His eyes were red at the edges. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me for that one either, she said. That was yours. He came to stand beside her at the counter. Not touching just beside her, close the way two people stand when they have stopped needing to maintain the formal distances. She told me she was angry, he said. I know. She said. He stopped. She said she'd been afraid to tell me because she thought I'd take it as her blaming me, for staying, for not making Kat come to Denver. He looked at the counter. I told her I said that I blamed myself for a long time too, and that neither of us was responsible for what Catherine chose. Catherine chose everything she ever did. She did, Hazel said. I told Ruth that the angry and the missing can both be true, he said. At the same time. That's exactly right, Hazel said. He looked at her. You told her that first, didn't you? Get the credit for your own conversation, she said. He almost laughed again. She was getting more of those, the almost laughs becoming real, happening more often, happening with less distance from themselves. October came, and with it, the water rights hearing. Hazel did not go to Mesilla. She stayed in Harlow Creek with the children and ran the house and waited. Cole went with Hargrove and Price and the documentation from 6 ranchers and Rafferty's testimony about his grandfather's memory of the creek and all of it. He was gone 4 days. The children were watched by all 3 of their teachers during the days and in the evenings. Hazel held the household together with the competence of someone who had been doing it for 4 months and knew every loose board and difficult mood and particular requirement by heart. On the second night, Emma woke up in the dark and came downstairs and found Hazel in the kitchen and climbed into the chair across from her without being asked. "Are you scared?" Emma asked. "A little," Hazel said. "About the water. About all of it." Emma accepted this. "Papa's coming back," she said, stating it, not reassuring herself, stating a fact she had decided on. "He is," Hazel said. "And then it'll be okay," Emma said. "All the things. They'll be okay." Hazel looked at this 5-year-old with her absolute conviction and her clear eyes, and the hand she reached across and put on Hazel's like a period at the end of a sentence. "Yeah," Hazel said. "They will." Cole came back on a Thursday. He rode in at mid-morning, and Hazel was on the porch, not waiting. Specifically, she had come out to shake a rug, and if her eyes had been going to the road at regular intervals for 2 days, that was her own business, and she saw him coming down the road on the gray, and she could tell from the way he was riding from across that distance before she could see his face. He was riding like a man who had won something. She set down the rug. He came through the gate and off the horse, and she came down the steps, and they met in the yard, and he said, "Hargrove's going to celebrate for a week. Briggs' lawyers didn't have the county records right. The original patent claim never included the main creek line. It was right there in the 1871 survey, and nobody had looked at it properly, because Briggs' people were assuming, and Castile was." He stopped, looked at her. "We won. The diversion order is permanent. Briggs can't touch the creek." Hazel put both hands on his face. She had not planned to do that. Her hands moved before the thought completed. He went still. She looked at him. This man she had been learning for 4 months. This man who had forgotten how to function, and remembered again this man who smiled now and laughed sometimes, and sat at breakfast with his children, and talked about their mother, and rode to Mesilla and won. "Good," she said. He covered her hands with his. "Large, rough, warm. We should go inside," he said. "The children are going to—" "In a minute," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The yard was quiet around them. The wind moved the way it moved in Harlow Creek, steady and persistent and familiar. Now, a sound she had been hearing for 4 months, and had stopped hearing as foreign, and started hearing as simply the sound of this place, her place. "Hazel," he said. "I know," she said. She dropped her hands. He kept hold of one of them, just the one, and they walked toward the house together. Emma appeared in the doorway before they reached the porch. She looked at Cole, and she looked at their hands, and she looked at Hazel, and her face did the thing it did when she had been right about something and was allowing herself a moment of private satisfaction before continuing. "Papa won," she said. Not a question. "Papa won," Cole confirmed. Emma nodded. Then she turned and went inside to tell the others. They were married in November in Harlow Creek, on a morning when the territory had finally let go of the summer heat, and the air was the kind of clear that makes everything feel like it was just made. The ceremony was small. Cole and Hazel, and the 5 children, and Rafferty, and the Vasquez family, and Miss Alcott, who had taught Nell to be proud of her drawing, and had stayed after class twice to help Ruth with her mathematics. Eleanor had sent a letter that arrived the week before, warm and direct in her way, saying she would visit in spring, and she hoped the wedding was good and simple, and that was, she was sorry she couldn't be there, and that Catherine would have. And then the letter had a pause in it, the kind you can feel even in handwriting, and then it said, "Catherine would have been glad." Hazel read that line twice. Then she folded the letter and kept it. She wore her good dress, not the one she'd arrived in, the one she'd made herself 2 weeks prior from fabric she'd bought in town with her wages, deep blue, practical cut, well made. She did her own hair. Ruth braided it for her. She sat at the kitchen table, and Ruth braided her hair the way Hazel had braided Ruth's, and they looked at each other in the small mirror Ruth held up, and neither of them said anything that needed saying, because everything had already been said over 4 months of evenings at this table. Cole stood at the front of the room that had been the front room and was now their front room and waited for her. She came down the stairs. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 4 months, learning her, building the knowledge of her into something that had weight and permanence, except that now there was nothing held back in it. All of it visible, all of it present. She came to stand beside him. The minister said the words. They said theirs. Samuel, in Nell's arms at the front row, grabbed Emma's sleeve with one fist and chewed on it with the focused satisfaction of an infant who has no idea what is happening but approves of the general atmosphere. James stood straight with his hands at his sides in the serious soldierly way he'd adopted since the fence mending in June, watching his father with eyes that had finally stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Nell was crying. She did not acknowledge that she was crying. Emma was watching Hazel with the expression of someone confirming a calculation that had been running since the first night when she had come down 7 stairs and taken a stranger's hand and held on. When it was over, Cole looked at Hazel, and Hazel looked at Cole, and the front room was warm and full of the people who had become the furniture of her life, the permanent fixtures, the load-bearing walls she had not planned to find here, but had found anyway. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. "The roof still leaks," she said. "In the northeast corner. You need to fix that before winter." He laughed, all the way, full and real and present, the laugh of a man who has come back to himself. She smiled and let him have it. James turned to Rafferty and said something practical about fence posts. Nell wiped her face and pretended she hadn't. Emma immediately began organizing the food that Miss Alcott had brought because the eating portion of the occasion was the most interesting part as far as Emma was concerned. Ruth stood beside Hazel, and their arms were touching, and neither of them moved away from it. That evening, after the guests had gone, and the children were fed, and the kitchen was clean, because the kitchen was always going to be clean. Now that much was settled, Hazel stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the yard, and the gate, and the road beyond it. The same view she'd seen on the first evening. The same sky, the same wind. Everything else was different. Cole came to stand beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "More than all right," she said. He put his hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into it, not heavily, just the leaning of someone who has decided that a thing is solid and is testing the decision and finding it true. "I have something," he said. She turned. He was holding a piece of paper. Old. Folded many times. He unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold something you have been keeping. "Eleanor sent it with the letter," he said. Said she found it in Catherine's writing things, with a note in Catherine's hand that said it was the song, the words. Hazel took the paper. The handwriting was someone else's rounder and more flowing than Eleanor's script. Catherine's, she understood. The words on it were in a language she didn't know, Scottish Gaelic, with the English written beneath each line in Catherine's careful translation. A song about a home, about coming back to a place, about the specific love of somewhere that holds you. "The song," Hazel said. "The Wednesday morning song," Cole said. She looked at the paper for a long moment. "Nell is going to learn this," she said. "I know," he said. "She'll probably teach Emma. Emma will sing it badly and at great volume." "Almost certainly," he said. She folded the paper. She held it. She thought about the employment office. The $32. The letter that said orderly and meant desperate. 4 days on a stagecoach. The door she had almost walked back out of. The hand of a 5-year-old girl on the stairs holding on. She thought she had been looking for a place that needed her. She had found a place that needed her. And then, which was the part she hadn't planned, the part that changed the whole equation, it had needed her back. She was not the housekeeper. She was not the woman who had come to fix a broken household and leave when it was fixed. She was Hazel Mercer, and this was her house, and those were her children, and the man beside her was her husband, And the road she had taken to get here, all the loss and the loneliness and the biscuits on a stagecoach and the $32 and the impossible letter had led here, exactly here, because there was nowhere else it was ever going to go. She was not leaving. She was not going anywhere. She was already home.